On October 30th, 2011, David Swift reported his wife, Karen, missing after returning home from a Halloween party the previous night. That night, Karen had come home, put their daughter Ashley to bed, and slept with her. However, when David woke up the next morning, Karen was gone. Karen Swift was a 44-year-old mother of 4 from Dyersburg, Tennessee. She was cheerful and worked multiple jobs, including cleaning houses and teaching aerobics, to support her family. Friends described her as devoted and selfless, often prioritizing others' needs over her own. Despite her efforts to create a stable environment for her children, Karen's marriage to David was marked by conflict. David's controlling behavior became more evident. Friends observed that he was not supportive of Karen working outside the home, which increased tensions between them. David's actions became more erratic as he dealt with jealousy and insecurity about Karen's independence. Reports indicate that he started stalking her during outings and confronted her about her interactions with friends. This atmosphere of tension and control set the stage for the events that followed. Karen and David's relationship was marked by infidelity from both partners. David had previously had an affair that led to the birth of another child. Although they reconciled, their trust remained fragile. In October 2011, Karen filed for divorce due to ongoing marital issues, just 3 weeks before she vanished. This filing was a significant shift in their relationship, causing increased tension at home. David reportedly reacted poorly to the divorce, feeling threatened by Karen's desire for independence. On the night of October 29, 2011, Karen Swift went to a Halloween party in her small town of Dyersburg. She received a call from Ashley to pick her up from a friend's house late that night and fell asleep next to her when they returned home. In the early morning hours of October 30, 2011, David Swift called the police to report that his wife, Karen Swift, was missing. He expressed concern for her safety and was worried about where she might be. This call initiated a formal investigation into Karen's disappearance, prompting the police to gather information about her last known activities and interactions before she went missing. Around 3 p.m. on October 30th, police began their search for Karen Swift. They found her car abandoned on the side, about a quarter mile from her family's home. The car had a flat tire due to a rusty screw lodged in it. When officers inspected the vehicle, they found no signs of foul play inside, but noted that Karen's keys and purse were missing. Forensic tests on the car did not reveal any blood or evidence of a struggle. The discovery of the abandoned car raised more questions about Karen's whereabouts and prompted investigators to widen their search in the nearby areas. David stated that he last saw Karen around 2 a.m. when she came home with their daughter, Ashley, after a Halloween party. David told the police that both Karen and Ashley went to bed shortly after arriving home. Later, during additional police interviews, David mentioned that he briefly checked on Ashley to ensure she was safe before going back upstairs to sleep. His version of events raised suspicions among investigators about the timeline of Karen's disappearance and whether he was involved. He also claimed he did not know of any plans Karen might have had for that night and was confused about her sudden absence. Witnesses reported a pattern of controlling behavior from David toward Karen. Friends described his jealousy and possessiveness, mentioning that he would often only call Karen while she was out with friends. They also noted instances of David stalking Karen, leading to serious confrontations in their relationship. These behaviors raised red flags about Karen's safety and were a significant part of the investigation into her disappearance. Detectives gathered evidence and recognized how crucial testimonies were for grasping the complexities of Karen and David's troubled marriage. After Karen went missing, David approached law enforcement and offered to assist in the search for his wife. Notably, he arrived at the local police station using crutches, claiming that he had re-injured his knee, which he had previously operated on a few months prior. The timing of this injury, coinciding with his wife's disappearance amidst their troubled relationship, raised suspicions. On December 10, 2011, the investigation into Karen Swift's disappearance took a significant turn when her remains were found in a cemetery less than 3 miles from the Swift family home. 2 hunters made the discovery and promptly informed the police. Investigators quickly arrived to secure the area, and forensic analysis later confirmed that the remains were those of Karen Swift. An autopsy revealed that Karen had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, which was ruled a homicide. This finding changed the nature of the investigation from a missing person case to a homicide case. The autopsy showed that the trauma Karen suffered would have been deadly. However, because a significant amount of time had passed since her disappearance, figuring out the exact details of her death was difficult. Investigators observed that there were no signs to suggest that the murder took place at the cemetery. It seemed Karen's body had been moved there after she died. Finding her remains brought renewed attention to David Swift as a suspect, particularly because the nature of her injuries and the location of her body raised important questions about his potential involvement. Investigators started to examine David's actions and statements more carefully, looking for any evidence that could connect him to her death. They discovered that Karen had obtained a second cell phone to prevent David from tracking her, which indicated her wish for privacy amid their troubled relationship. During the investigation, David claimed he didn't know about this second phone. However, authorities found that the number was saved in his work phone. During interviews with investigators, David seemed more concerned about Karen's actions than about her well-being. The detective pointed out that David's fixating on his wife's supposed drinking and partying suggested he might be hiding something. However, despite these observations, investigators faced challenges in finding physical or eyewitness evidence that connected David to the homicide, which hindered the progress of the investigation. In the months after Karen disappeared, David moved to Alabama and got remarried. He stayed involved in raising their daughter, Ashley, but did not provide any new information about Karen's case. Ashley wanted to learn more about what happened to her mother but felt increasingly hopeless about finding any answers. Authorities looked into David's claims about changes in Karen's behavior, particularly regarding her new friendships. Investigators examined this narrative to see if it was relevant to her disappearance. From December 16 to 20, 2011, forensic examinations took place at both the Swift home and Karen's vehicle. Investigators found no evidence of foul play in the house but noticed some mess in Karen's bedroom. They also found 7 gallons of bleach, which David claimed were for cleaning after a neighbor's dog poisoning incident. As the investigation continued in January 2012, law enforcement made public appeals for information about Karen's disappearance and death, hoping to find witnesses who had seen her or knew where she was last seen. However, the lack of solid evidence against David slowed the progress of the case. Authorities pursued various leads and collected testimonies suggesting David's possible involvement in Karen's murder. The investigation remained open throughout 2011 and 2012 as they worked to achieve justice for Karen Swift. On August 8, 2022, David Swift was charged with first-degree premeditated murder in connection to his wife's death, representing a major breakthrough in a case that had been unresolved for over a decade. This arrest surprised many in the community and Karen's family, who had struggled for years with uncertainty surrounding her disappearance. Ashley Swift, Karen's daughter, voiced her confusion and distress regarding her father's arrest. After years without a clear suspect, she found it hard to cope with the sudden shift in the investigation. The arrest also deeply affected the Dyersburg community. For over 10 years, residents had closely followed the case, often discussing it in search of answers about Karen's fate. The investigation's stagnation left many feeling frustrated and hopeless. Danny Goodman, the prosecutor at the time, believed that earlier investigators in Karen's case were waiting for a key piece of evidence that could prove David's guilt. However, as the case developed, it became clear that such evidence did not exist. The investigation was interrupted by global issue, causing everything, including Karen's case, to come to a standstill. Instead of halting their work, the prosecutors seized this time to examine about 30 large bins of files related to Karen's murder. Goodman confirmed that they never discovered any crucial evidence against David, but they did find that the case resembled a puzzle with a clear motive. Goodman was revealed that throughout their relationship, David had managed to control nearly every aspect of Karen's life. However, he began to realize that he was losing that grip. The combination of losing control, Karen's social activities, and the impending divorce increased his frustration, ultimately leading him to plot her murder. The prosecution built a clear case regarding the murder of Karen Swift. Here's how they believe the events unfolded. On October 30th, Karen received a call from Ashley, picked her up, and they both returned home, eventually falling asleep together in bed. While they were asleep, David moved Ashley to another room and then carried out his plan. He dragged Karen to the garage, brutally stomped on her head to make her death look like the result of an abduction. Afterward, he placed Karen's body in the car, drove to the cemetery, where he disposed of her body and covered it up to create the illusion that she had been kidnapped. In the days that followed, David approached the authorities and offered to assist in finding his wife's killer. The prosecution noted that he visited the authorities using crutches to suggest he could not have dragged Karen's body. He explained that he was on crutches due to a knee injury he had sustained after surgery months earlier. The prosecutors dismissed the idea that Karen left on her own or was abducted, arguing that several unlikely assumptions would need to be true for this theory to make sense. For example, if Karen had left voluntarily, she would have needed to have plans to meet someone, but there was no evidence of this. Additionally, if she didn't leave on her own, it was puzzling why she would move Ashley to another room. Another important factor to consider is that toxicology reports showed Karen had taken Benadryl before going to sleep. Benadryl is a sleep aid, so if Karen intended to go out after dropping Ashley off, it's puzzling why she would take a sleeping pill beforehand. To strengthen their theory of an alleged crime, prosecutors presented a substantial amount of evidence, most of which was circumstantial and gathered over 10 years ago. During the trial, it was shown that Karen's secret phone had no activity after she got into bed with Ashley. However, a forensic analysis revealed that the phone had been used and that a voicemail was called at 9:55 a.m. on October 30th. By this time, several hours had elapsed, and investigators had not yet located either Karen or her phone. Additionally, it was discovered that the phone had been connected to the family's Wi-Fi, and the only adult at home when the call was made was David. To support their claim that David faked an injury, the prosecution cited a neighbor's testimony. The neighbor reported seeing David move hay bales weighing around 60 pounds without using crutches. The prosecution put forward a circumstantial case suggesting that David committed murder. However, the defense challenged these allegations. The claims against David were primarily based on the idea that he was a controlling husband. His lawyer, Daniel Taylor, offered a different point of view, arguing that David was not trying to dominate Karen's life but was genuinely worried about his partner. During the trial, it was revealed that Karen struggled with alcoholism and partying. One neighbor reported finding her passed out and naked on their sofa during a party, which led to David being called to pick her up. Testimony suggested that Karen was involved in a buy and sell escort services ring and was interested in dating other men. The defense attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to support the state's claims about the murder. He pointed out the inconsistency of a murder by stomping if there was no blood found in the garage or the car. He also challenged the prosecution's assertion that David staged an attempted abduction, noting there was no evidence to suggest he left the house that night. Taylor emphasized another critical point: the medical examiner, who originally determined the cause of Karen's death, no longer believed that she had been stomped on the head. The defense maintained that David, who was injured and on crutches, could not have stomped on Karen's head even if it had occurred, as his injured leg could not support his weight while attempting to stomp with the other leg. This argument was further supported by David's physical therapist, who testified that David had significant difficulty walking and lifting. The prosecution had presented a photo of bleach located near the pool, but Taylor argued that this evidence was not strong enough. The defense lawyer dismissed the idea that blood could have been cleaned up with bleach. Ashley contested the prosecution's claims, asserting that it was her mother who moved her to another room. Although her memory of the event was challenged, she insisted she recognized her mother's touch and firmly believed it was Karen who did it. Furthermore, Ashley argued that her father's injury was sufficient to counter the prosecution's assertion that he had attacked Karen. She pointed out that Karen was athletic, and at the time of the murder, her father was physically unable to overpower her. To highlight David's innocence, Taylor pointed out that the phone mentioned by the prosecution was based on unreliable evidence. He emphasized that David's condition made it impossible for him to have committed the murder, especially given the tenuous link between the phone and the crime. It is possible that Karen left her secret phone at her house after taking a sleeping aid, which could explain its presence. Furthermore, the defense argued that David was worried about his partner. So, he has called her to check her voicemail and locate her. The weakest part of the case against David Swift was the lack of physical evidence. Investigators found no incriminating evidence at the house, in the vehicle, or on David himself. There was also no murder weapon, leading prosecutors to suggest that David had used his foot, despite his visible physical limitations. Throughout the trial, David's defense maintained, despite the state's objections, that the charges were influenced by political motives. They argued that the sheriff and district attorney, both up for re-election, felt pressured to pursue the case without any direct evidence linking David to the crime. When the jury finished deliberating, they delivered an unexpected verdict. David Swift was acquitted of first-degree and second-degree murder, as well as attempted first-degree and second-degree murder. However, they could not reach a unanimous decision on the charge of voluntary manslaughter, and ultimately informed the judge of their deadlock. This indecision regarding the voluntary manslaughter allegations resulted in a mistrial in June 2024. Since then, there have been new developments in David Swift's case. His ex-wife, Kelly Essman, has accused him of stalking her. In an interview, Kelly shared that she met David on a dating site 3 years after Karen's death, and they married in 2016. In October 2024, the Tennessee Court of Appeals rejected a request from David's legal team to dismiss the voluntary manslaughter charge related to Karen's case, which he has pleaded not guilty to. This charge will be addressed in a new trial. David is currently in custody, waiting for the trial concerning the voluntary manslaughter charge, while also facing separate stalking charges from his ex-wife in Alabama. The complexities of both cases are being reviewed as everyone involved seeks justice. As for Ashley, she says she wants justice for her mother, but she also wants her father to come home and find a normal life. Meanwhile, Karen's friends are no longer sure what they believe. The tragic case of Karen Swift remains a haunting mystery in Dyersburg, Tennessee, marked by loss, suspicion, and lingering questions. Karen, a devoted mother whose vibrant spirit touched many, was taken too soon, her life ended by a brutal act that shattered her family and community. The investigation, spanning over a decade, pointed to her husband, David Swift, whose controlling behavior and questionable actions fueled suspicion, yet the absence of definitive evidence left justice elusive. The 2024 trial, ending in acquittals on murder charges and a mistrial on voluntary manslaughter, underscored the case's complexity, leaving Karen's daughter Ashley torn between seeking truth and longing for her father's return. Now, David faces a new trial and separate allegations. Karen's memory endures through those who loved her, a poignant reminder of the fragility of trust and the enduring quest for answers in the face of tragedy. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Jennifer Corbin. Jennifer Corbin, a 33-year-old woman, was married to Barton Corbin, a well-known 40-year-old dentist in Buford, Georgia. They have been together for 7 years and live in a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood. They had 2 sons, Dylan and Dalton, aged 5 and 7. From the outside, the Corbins appeared to have an ideal life, a large house, happy family photos, and a stable family dynamic. Barton was regarded as a model father, while Jennifer was deeply devoted to motherhood. Despite their outward appearances, tensions between Jennifer and Barton had been growing. Jennifer, who had been a free-spirited woman in her younger years, transformed into a dedicated wife and mother after getting married and having her first child. She was known for her warm personality and her ease in building relationships with people from all backgrounds and age groups. Her sociable nature led her to volunteer at her church, where she worked in the Sunday school program for children. When Jennifer and Barton first met, her family warmly welcomed him, quickly treating him as one of their own. He often joined them on trips and spent most weekends with them. Barton was seen as intelligent and charismatic, easily winning over those around him. However, over time, the marriage began to falter. Jennifer eventually realized that continuing the relationship was no longer possible. Despite her repeated efforts to repair the marriage, she came to terms with its failure and began preparing for a divorce. Everything changed for the Corbin family on the morning of December 4, 2004. Their eldest son, Dalton, woke up to find the house unusually quiet. His mother usually rose earlier than everyone else, and his father, Barton, would already be preparing for work. But that morning, an eerie silence filled the home. Neither of his parents was anywhere to be found. Concerned, Dalton repeatedly called out to them, but there was no response. Finally, he entered his parents' bedroom and was horrified to find his mother lifeless. Horrified by the scene, Dalton, still wearing his pajamas, rushed to their neighbors for help, too distressed to even change his clothes. The neighbors quickly entered the house and confirmed that his mother, Jennifer, had passed away. Without wasting any time, They called emergency services at 11 a.m. When relatives were notified of the tragic news, they were in utter disbelief. Nobody could have ever imagined such a terrible incident, especially since Jennifer had always been viewed as a strong and devoted mother. By the time family members arrived at Jennifer's house, law enforcement officers were already on the scene conducting their investigation. Her sister Heather went to the neighbor's home to comfort and care for Dalton and Dylan. Meanwhile, Dalton was inconsolable, crying uncontrollably. The traumatic experience left a deep psychological scar on him, and he struggled for a long time to cope with the horrifying memory of what he had witnessed. Jennifer's body was found in the bedroom of her house. She was wearing a nightgown and lying on her side. A weapon was discovered under the sheet next to her, with her hand resting nearby. Divorce papers were also found under the sheet. On the nightstand, there was an open bottle of wine. Jennifer had been going through an incredibly difficult time. Her husband had filed for divorce, sought custody of their children, planned to take the case to the Supreme Court to claim their property, and even demanded alimony. At first glance, the scene suggests that Jennifer voluntarily ended her life. The challenges she faced seemed overwhelming, and she had previously expressed frustration at seeing what she had long considered an ideal marriage crumble before her eyes. During this time, Jennifer frequently confided in her loved ones, sharing her fears of potentially losing custody of her children and the difficulties she anticipated during the divorce proceedings. Despite the police initially ruling her death as a voluntary act of ending her life, her family strongly disagreed with this conclusion. By late December, their frustration with the authorities had reached its peak. They insisted that she would never harm herself. To her, the divorce was not a tragedy but rather an opportunity to finally gain the freedom she had long awaited, despite the obstacles ahead. Her family emphasized that Jennifer had at least two vital reasons to live: her two sons, Dalton and Dylan. Everyone who knew Jennifer well was convinced she would never harm herself. Even if she had, they believed she would neither have done it at home nor allowed her child to be the one to discover her. It was clear to everyone that someone else must have been involved. Her relatives demanded that the culprit be identified and brought to justice, while her parents even had a prime suspect in mind: her husband, Barton Corbin. Typically, in cases like this, the spouse is the first to be investigated. Accompanied by a lawyer, Barton went to the police station to answer their questions. He stated that the night before Jennifer's death, he had been at a restaurant with friends until 1 a.m. Afterward, he drove to his brother's house, where he spent the night. Barton explained that he and Jennifer had argued earlier, and he chose not to return home, meaning he hadn't seen her since the previous day. He voluntarily handed over the clothes he had worn that evening, and detectives found no traces of bloodstains, scratches, or signs of defensive wounds on him. Testing for gunpowder residue on his hands also came back negative. With no further evidence to implicate Barton, investigators had no additional questions for him. Meanwhile, Jennifer's relatives continued to insist that she had been murdered. As they pushed for further investigation, the district attorney began looking into the troubled history of Jennifer's marriage to Barton. What they uncovered was a dark past connected to Barton's time as a dentist. While investigators delved into Barton's background, they discovered that 14 years prior to Jennifer's death, he had been involved in another romantic relationship that ended under similarly suspicious circumstances. During that time, Barton dated a fellow dentistry classmate named Dolly Hearn, a bright, cheerful, and beautiful young woman. Interestingly, Jennifer's family had never heard of Dolly until the investigation began. But what had happened to Dolly? According to Dolly's sister, she met Barton in their third year at Georgia Medical College, where they were both studying dentistry and living on campus. Initially, the relationship seemed fine, but over time it grew strained and became increasingly aggressive. Witnesses recalled that as the relationship deteriorated, Barton became overly jealous and verbally abusive. Dolly eventually decided to end the relationship. However, following the breakup, her life took a troubling turn. A series of strange and unsettling incidents began occurring, leading Dolly to consider contacting the police. Her apartment was broken into, the windows of her car were smashed, paint was poured into her gas tank, and a parcel was stolen from her mailbox. Later, an essential coursework file containing a patient list from a dental clinic mysteriously disappeared. One particularly concerning incident involved someone breaking into Dolly's apartment and swapping her contact lens solution with hairspray. The most concerning incident, however, was the disappearance of her cat, which was never found. At first, Dolly dismissed these occurrences as mere bad luck, a rough patch in her life. But as the incidents mounted, she began to recognize a pattern. These were not random coincidences. Dolly felt targeted and tormented. She confided in friends and family, convinced that her ex-boyfriend Barton, who had been struggling to cope with their breakup and behaving aggressively, was responsible. Determined to catch Barton in the act, Dolly attempted to secretly record a conversation with him, hoping he would confess to his actions. However, Barton grew suspicious and abruptly ended the conversation. After that meeting, the unsettling incidents in Dolly's life began to taper off. Still, she lived in fear, avoiding being alone in her apartment and worrying about the possibility of future attacks or ambushes. As summer vacation approaches, Dolly gradually returns to her normal life, leaving all her problems behind and believing that Barton has ceased to harass her. She even attended her brother's graduation, looking radiant and happy. Tragically, no one could have predicted that she had only a few days left to live. On the afternoon of June 6, 1990, Dolly's neighbor discovered her lifeless body in her apartment. She died from a single weapon wound to the head. A weapon was found on her lap as she sat cross-legged. The weapon wound on the right side of her head led detectives to conclude that she had voluntarily ended her life. Similar to Jennifer's case years later, Dolly's death was quickly ruled as the end of her life. Unfortunately, due to the lack of investigative rigor in the 1990s, such cases were often inadequately examined. The presence of the weapon and the fundamental circumstances surrounding her death were accepted at face value, and the case was closed without additional investigation. Dolly's family, like Jennifer's relatives, is convinced that Dolly could not have voluntarily ended her life. They found it difficult to accept that such a bright, beautiful, and cheerful young woman, full of potential and showing no signs of depression, would voluntarily end her life. Both her mother and sister insisted that Barton should be investigated, especially because there had been a difficult breakup shortly before the tragedy, and his behavior had been suspicious. Although Barton was interrogated in the 1990s in connection with these suspicions, the authorities were unable to find concrete evidence linking him to a crime. Barton denied any involvement, and the investigation was eventually dropped, concluding that Dolly had voluntarily ended her life. Nonetheless, the case was never officially closed, thanks to Dolly's family's determination to seek justice. Her relatives tirelessly urged law enforcement to fully resolve the case. Even independent experts hired by the family concluded that Dolly's death was likely a voluntary act to end her life. Her mother, however, refused to believe that there was any good reason for her daughter to do so. Her mother maintained that Dolly had lived in fear of Barton during her final months and held him solely responsible for her death. Barton was described by his peers as intelligent and highly perceptive. His mind and ability to manipulate others often complicated matters. However, not everyone was deceived by him. For instance, one of Dolly's classmates believed her fears about Barton and repeatedly urged her to take precautions. Following this advice, Dolly decided to purchase a weapon for self-defense. Despite her financial difficulties, her father came to her aid, lending her a weapon and warning her that if she did not confront Barton, her life would be in danger. Tragically, his warning proved true. However, there was no evidence to implicate Barton in Dolly's death. Her case remained unsolved for 14 years, until the death of Jennifer. The circumstances of Jennifer's death, including the weapon used and the staged nature of the scene, bore striking similarities to Dolly's case. Upon further investigation, authorities reopened Dolly's case and re-examined both incidents. They had no substance abuse, no criminal activity or negative influences, and no apparent reason for them to voluntarily end their lives. The only connection between them was Barton. The case files were retrieved from archives, allowing investigators to revisit the materials with a fresh perspective and advanced forensic techniques. Crime scene photos from 1990 were handed over to a blood spatter expert, who enlarged the images and identified 3 distinct marks that suggested the body had been moved after the attack. This raises doubts because it is very rare for a woman to die from self-inflicted injuries to the back of the head, an unusual method that requires an arm position which is difficult to achieve naturally. Furthermore, neither case included a suicide note. Would Jennifer truly have voluntarily ended her life without leaving a goodbye note for her children behind? The circumstances increasingly appeared staged. Investigators then initiated wiretapping of Barton's phone. When a friend called Barton and informed him that the investigation into Dolly's case had been reopened, he reacted angrily by calling his ex-girlfriend and making an abusive phone call. According to those who knew him, his disrespect for women was not uncommon. At the same time, he was always skillful at concealing his true behavior and attitude. Thanks to wiretapping, the authorities were finally able to uncover the truth about his real character. Jennifer's relatives, upon learning about Dolly's case, felt compelled to meet her family. They discovered many similarities, particularly a shared goal of holding Barton accountable and ensuring his imprisonment. What shocked Jennifer's family the most was that Barton had never mentioned the tragic story of Dolly. 6 years after that incident, he went on to marry Jennifer. Had Jennifer known about these unsettling details, she would never have pursued a relationship with him. Both families were stunned and questioned why the authorities had overlooked these connections for so long. Even 7-year-old Dalton, who found his mother's body, told detectives during their first conversation that he believed his father was responsible for her death. Those who knew Barton were well aware of his explosive temper. Jennifer's family recalled that, for years, he frequently had angry outbursts, often directed at her or their sons. Toward the end of their time together, arguments became a daily occurrence. Shortly before her death, Jennifer confided in her mother that she no longer loved Barton and was staying in the marriage solely for the sake of their children. However, she has recently realized that Barton's presence was not benefiting their children. According to her family, the turning point occurred on Thanksgiving in 2004. During the holiday, Barton suddenly declared that they needed to leave. Not wanting to provoke an argument, Jennifer gathered their sons and left with him. That evening, she called her sister and revealed that Barton had attacked her in the car, in front of their sons. The following Monday, Barton filed for divorce. He demanded ownership of the house, custody of the children, and alimony. 2 days later, Jennifer caught him going through her purse. He stole her personal diary and cell phone before leaving the house, running over her foot with his car as he drove away. Nevertheless, she did not report him to the police. At this point, Jennifer began fearing for her safety. Only 3 days later, she was found dead. Her family was shocked by Barton's reaction to the news of her death. He showed no emotion, no sadness or shock. His cold demeanor immediately raised suspicions among investigators. While his reaction suggested guilt, it was not enough evidence to charge him. Prosecutors required concrete evidence connecting Barton to the weapon discovered near Jennifer's body. Upon investigation, they discovered that the weapon was a rare, older Smith & Wesson model. Its serial number was traced back to a dealer in Alabama, who had sold it in 1957. This discovery provided investigators with an important lead. They learned that Barton had a close friend in Alabama named Richard Wilson, a weapon collector with a particular interest in rare models. Richard and Barton had been friends since their college days. Investigators decided to interview Richard on December 15, 2004. During the interview, he stated that he had only vaguely heard about Jennifer's death and knew none of the details. He claimed that Barton had merely mentioned his wife's death without offering any specifics. He also denied knowing anything about firearms related to the incident. Unfortunately, the encounter did not provide investigators with any useful information. The police then shifted their approach and decided to track the geolocation of Barton's mobile phone. Barton claimed that on the night of his wife's murder, he had been out of town with friends and had later stayed at his brother's house, returning only the following morning. He insisted that his wife and children were alone at home that night. However, the estimated time of Jennifer's death was around 2 a.m. Phone records revealed that Barton's mobile phone was near the house at the time of her death. This revelation destroyed Barton's alibi and significantly heightened suspicions, marking his first major misstep in the investigation. Based on data from local cell towers, Barton had arrived at Jennifer's house at approximately 1 a.m. and left at around 2 a.m., aligning precisely with the time of Jennifer's murder. A neighbor also reported seeing a car resembling Barton's near the house that night. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet and the path it entered Jennifer's head did not match the angle or location consistent with her self-harm. Blood samples from her face also showed a nearly 180-degree change in the direction of flow, contrary to what would normally be expected in a case of self-harm. A detailed forensic analysis of the bullet trajectory and gunshot residue further revealed that it would have been physically impossible for Jennifer to have held the weapon in such a manner to attack herself. Strangely, no fingerprints, neither hers nor anyone else's, were found on the weapon. This strongly suggests that the weapon was wiped clean after use. If Jennifer had died instantly, the question arose, who could have done this? Being a dentist, Barton would have had access to latex gloves, which he could have used to handle the weapon without leaving fingerprints. Another critical piece of evidence was the absence of gunpowder residue on Jennifer's hands. If she had attacked herself at such close range, gunpowder traces would have been unavoidable. Additionally, the mortal wound killed her instantly, causing her body to go limp. This would have made it impossible for her hand to be resting on the weapon underneath the sheet. Clearly, she could not have placed it there herself. County authorities were unable to complete their investigation into Jennifer's murder, but they had already charged Barton with the murder of Dolly. He was arrested, and his dramatic capture was broadcasted on the news. Barton clearly had no idea that the first charge against him was related to the massacre that had occurred 14 years earlier. For Dolly's family, the live broadcast of the arrest was the most meaningful moment of their lives, something they had been waiting for 14 years. Soon after, Barton faced accusations of murdering his spouse, Jennifer. Consequently, he had to confront two groups of prosecutors simultaneously. To defend himself, Barton hired top-tier lawyers. During the preliminary hearing, Barton's defense attorney argued that Jennifer and Dolly had voluntarily taken their own lives, claiming that the link between Barton and the cases was purely coincidental. Several independent forensic experts supported this argument, aligning their findings with the defense's claims. Additionally, the defense insinuated that renewed interest in Jennifer's case had reignited suspicions about Dolly's death, accusing investigators of drawing superficial and unfounded conclusions in both cases. The prosecution, however, highlighted the improbability that two women, Jennifer and Dolly, both romantically involved with the same man, would die in similarly tragic circumstances as mere coincidence. While the prosecutor's office presented strong evidence, the defense skillfully challenged these claims. For example, they argued that the blow during the Thanksgiving altercation was not an act of domestic violence but an unintentional slip, a point that could weaken the prosecution's case. As for the absence of fingerprints on the weapon used in Jennifer's murder, the defense explained that the textured surface of the handle made it difficult to produce clear prints, a claim supported by some forensic experts. In the Supreme Court, the defense aimed to counter the prosecution's arguments by highlighting procedural errors in the investigation and methodically addressing each point. They proposed alternative explanations, such as the possibility that gunpowder particles were trapped in Jennifer's hair, which could account for the absence of traces on her hands. The defense meticulously analyzed inconsistencies in the prosecutor's narrative, including presenting a plausible angle of bullet entry and demonstrating a method of holding the weapon that Jennifer could have executed herself. Barton's phone was detected near Jennifer's house around 2 a.m., but the defense argued that this was insignificant due to the unknown exact time of her death. This argument gained traction as her body temperature suggested that she might have died much later. One expert estimated her death occurred around 6 or 7 a.m., a time when Barton was confirmed to have been elsewhere. The defense also emphasized that Jennifer had strong motives to end her life due to her tumultuous personal circumstances, including a divorce, a collapsing family situation, the risk of losing both her home and custody of her children, and the possibility of having to pay alimony to her husband. Further complicating the situation was Jennifer's online relationship with a man named Chris, which had been ongoing for some time. This relationship caused her to worry about her emotional stability, which negatively affected her public image. Barton's chances of winning the custody battle seemed stronger in light of this revelation. Jennifer's family feared that the defense would use her online relationship to tarnish her reputation during the hearings. However, they understood her actions, as she had been seeking comfort and emotional connection after spending years in a relationship with Barton, whom she no longer loved. Her correspondence with Chris continued up until the final moments of her life. The police eventually discovered the true identity of Jennifer's online correspondent, a woman named Anita, from Missouri, a mother of 2 children who had simply been searching for a pen pal. Anita had introduced herself as a man when she began communicating with Jennifer. Sharing her struggles, Anita found common ground with Jennifer, though the 2 women had never met in person. Importantly, Anita had no connection to Jennifer's death. Meanwhile, prosecutors faced significant challenges in the case, as Barton's defense team excelled in highlighting flaws in the investigation. The most significant issue was the lack of evidence directly connecting the weapon to Barton. A pivotal development shifted the course of the case when the Supreme Court investigated telephone wiretaps. It was discovered that, on November 30, 2004, Barton had a face-to-face conversation with his friend Richard in Alabama, rather than communicating over the phone as previously believed. The investigation revealed that the weapon used in the crime belonged to Richard, leading to significant progress in the case. Just 1 day after Barton filed for divorce and 5 days before the murder, he visited Richard, the owner of the weapon. This revelation greatly strengthened the prosecution's position. In September, an investigator handed the prosecutor a note from the Alabama police chief, revealing critical new information. The note stated that Richard had been questioned about the weapon. During the interrogation, the police chief reported that Richard had admitted Barton approached him on November 30, 2004, seeking the weapon for self-defense. Barton, worried that his wife might be unfaithful and amid a contentious divorce, feared for his safety. Richard willingly handed the weapon over to Barton, which proved to be a key breakthrough in the case. This new evidence directly links Barton to the weapon and confirms that his wife, Jennifer, was unable to access it. A major challenge for Barton's defense team arose just days before the trial was set to begin, when this critical information was revealed. The development gave the district attorney newfound confidence in securing a conviction. The prosecutor approached Barton's lawyers with a final offer: if Barton confessed to the murders, he could avoid capital punishment and instead face life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. This was an important consideration, as both Dolly's and Jennifer's cases carried the potential for the death penalty. After discussions among authorities across various counties, a deal was negotiated. Barton would receive life imprisonment with parole eligibility if he admitted his guilt. Barton's attorneys presented the offer to him, and after careful deliberation, an agreement was made. On Friday, September 15, 2006, Barton appeared in court. Instead of mounting a defense for acquittal or fighting the possibility of capital punishment, Barton surprised everyone by confessing to the crimes. Faced with the overwhelming evidence amassed by the prosecutor's office, Barton understood that his chances of winning a jury trial were slim. He made the choice to confess, likely motivated by the desire to avoid the risk of execution and to secure a chance at life in prison. Ultimately, Barton weighed his options and made his decision. His confession was a shocking revelation for Dolly's family, who had long since lost hope of receiving such news. Despite their initial disbelief, it became widely believed that Barton was responsible for the deaths of Jennifer and Dolly. The defense argued that Barton's actions were driven by a desire to spare his children the pain of losing another loved one. However, many viewed this assertion as hypocritical and unconvincing. In reality, Barton seemed primarily concerned with saving himself from a lethal injection. Jennifer's 2 sons, Dalton and Dylan Corbin, were placed in the care of Jennifer's sister, Heather. Their father was sentenced to life in prison, and all contact with him was permanently severed. Arnima Hayat, a 19-year-old girl who was intelligent, ambitious, and full of dreams. She aspired to be a doctor to help save lives. Her family moved across the ocean to support her dreams, overcoming poverty and cultural challenges. In 2022, her name appeared in the headlines, but as a victim. Arnima was born in 2003 in a small town in southern Bangladesh. Although her family faced financial hardships, they always emphasized the importance of education. From a young age, Arnima displayed a remarkable and strong work ethic. She asking questions about everything from the stars to how to care for others, as her mother, Mahfuza Akhtar, remembers. In 2012, the Hayat family moved to Australia in hopes of providing their children with better educational and career opportunities. Arnima's father expressed they wanted their children to grow up in a place where their dreams could become a reality. However, their relocation to Sydney presented significant challenges, including language barriers, cultural differences, and financial struggles. Despite these obstacles, Arnima quickly adapted and immersed herself in her studies. She excelled at school, was recognized for her intelligence and determination. Arnima actively engaged in social events and helped organize school activities. By the age of 16, she decided to pursue a career in medicine and enrolled in a medical science course at a Sydney university. Her mother shared that Arnima's goal was to help people, especially women facing difficult situations. However, despite her outward success, Arnima faced personal challenges. Like many teenagers, she was searching for her identity. She dreamed of love and family, but her traditional parents urged her to focus on her education, complete university before considering marriage. In 2020, Arnima met Maraj Zafar, the son of Bangladeshi immigrants in Australia. He grew up in Sydney, where his family sought to establish a new life. Before meeting Arnima, Maraj worked as a construction worker and was passionate about sports, which contributed to his strong and imposing physique. 2 years older than Arnima, he and Arnima connected through mutual friends on social media. He quickly earned Arnima's trust, appearing caring, considerate, expressed his desire to protect and make her happy. Their relationship progressed rapidly. Maraj showered Arnima with gifts and assured her that they would create a happy family together. He appeared to be the ideal partner. In early 2021, Arnima and Maraj secretly got married, holding a ceremony without their families. This decision angered Arnima's parents, who couldn't believe she had done it without their approval and believed he was not a suitable match for her. Despite this, Maraj convinced Arnima that their marriage would bring them joy and promised to move them into a separate apartment to start fresh. However, just weeks after the wedding, the situation began to change. Arnima, who had been a cheerful and sociable young woman, became more withdrawn. Maraj exhibited jealousy and aggression. He prevented her from seeing her friends, monitored her communications, and even threatened to harm her if she disobeyed him. He claimed she was his. If she so much as glanced at someone while out, he would yell and threaten her. These threats were not just words. Arnima began to show obvious signs of abuse with increasing bruises on her body. Arnima was afraid of what he might do if she reported his abuse to the police. She held on to the hope that he would change and that their love could solve their problems. Besides, Maraj did not have a healthy relationship with her parents. In May 2021, he attacked Arnima's father when the father tried to help them, leading to a restraining order that barred Maraj from getting near the Hayat family. In December 2021, Arnima found out she was pregnant. This news brought a mix of joy and fear, as she realized the baby would connect her to Maraj for life. She texted a friend, sharing that she did not wish to have children with him and her growing dislike for him. Arnima often confided in her friends about the physical abuse she suffered. On one occasion, she described how he grabbed her neck and squeezed until she lost consciousness, when believing that he had seen her with another man. Arnima confided in her friends about her plans to approach the police, expressing regret over her marriage and her desire for a divorce. Arnima and Maraj's relationship was in crisis. Maraj, who once seemed caring, became more and more aggressive. He controlled her every action, forbade her from seeing friends and family. Finally, when it's too much to bear, she decided to leave Maraj. She sent her friend a text on January 29, 2022, which would be her final communication. During a phone call with his mother, Maraj revealed that he and Arnima had a severe argument. When she inquired about Arnima's condition, Maraj stated that she was not breathing. Although his mother urged him to call for an ambulance, he refused, saying, "He not going to call the ambulance. He scared the police will arrest him and put him in jail." Marriage then asked her about the cost of a flight overseas. Eventually, his mother called emergency services at 4:32 p.m. The police had to break down the door to enter the home, where they made a shocking discovery. Arnie Ma was found face down in the bathtub, partially submerged in a brown liquid, with 5 20-liter bottles of acid in the bathroom and a strong chemical odor in the air. Identification of her body required DNA testing. The scene posed significant challenges for the responding officers. Once they discovered the chemicals, they withdrew and called for additional support. She was murdered by the person who was supposed to love and protect her, the father of her child, and the one with whom she was meant to start a family. By the time the police arrived, Marriage had already fled. Upon investigating the crime scene, officers noted signs of a struggle. Neighbors reported hearing screams from the apartment on the night of January 29th, but no one contacted the police. Arnie Ma's text messages to her friends detailing the abuse she suffered became crucial evidence against her husband. The experts concluded that she died from strangulation. The investigation uncovered that her husband, Marriage, killed her after discovering she intended to leave him. He either strangled her with his hands or suffocated her with a pillow. Afterward, he placed her body, who was in the early stages of pregnancy, in a bathtub. Following the murder, Marriage's internet searches included queries like, "Can hydrochloric acid burn through skin? What is the prison sentence for murder in Sydney?" The next morning, Marriage tried hard to hide his actions. The investigation revealed that he left his apartment in North Parramatta in his van and went to the Bunnings store to buy 100 liters of hydrochloric acid. Cell phone records provided disturbing insights into the couple's relationship. Arnie Ma described experiences of abuse, stating that Marriage had beaten her nearly to death and referred to herself as a slave in an abusive marriage while expressing a desire to get a divorce. In December 2021, Arnie Ma warned Marriage that when people found out about them, he would go to jail for years. Marriage responded by questioning who would find out. In another conversation, Arnie Ma expressed her dislike for having a son like him, to which he replied that they would have many sons just like him. Marriage sent messages indicating that Arnie Ma needed his permission to leave their home. On the night she was murdered, Arnie Ma messaged a friend, stating that Arnie Ma had nobody except her. The friend replied that Arnie Ma had no choice and had to stay with him. In her last message at 9:10 p.m., Arnie Ma wrote that she hated him. She was dead within 45 minutes. The police released a picture of Marriage to inform the public that he was a suspect in a crime. Knowing he couldn't escape the country and that his image was widely circulated, he chose to surrender to the authorities. He went to the police station on his own. His lawyer later claimed that this decision to cooperate with the investigation was wise. However, during his arrest, Marriage's behavior raised concerns. He appeared nervous, refused to discuss the details of the crime, and maintained his innocence. Initially, he claimed that Arnie Ma had provoked the fight and that her death was accidental. However, under the weight of evidence, such as video footage and forensic analysis, Marriage changed his story. By the time of the trial, the police had gathered sufficient evidence to establish his guilt, clearly indicating that he murdered his wife and tried to dispose of her body to hide the crime. In May 2024, he admitted to committing murder, stating that he did so in a state of temporary insanity due to his fear of losing his wife. During the hearing at the New South Wales Supreme Court, Marriage kept a low profile and avoided making eye contact with Arnie Ma's family. His defense rested on 2 key points. First, the lawyers claimed that Arnie Ma had threatened to leave him and prevent him from seeing their future child, which triggered his anger. Second, they contended that Marriage had not premeditated the crime and that purchasing acid was a spontaneous act driven by his panic. In a letter to the court and Arnie Ma's family, Marriage expressed full responsibility for his actions. Prosecutors presented evidence showing Marriage's previous Google searches, including questions like "Does hydrochloric acid burn the skin?" and "term for murder in Sydney." This suggested that he was aware of his guilt. Arnie Ma's text messages to friends, where she spoke of abuse and threats, confirmed that Marriage was controlling and degrading towards her. Court documents included messages revealing marriage's abusive actions, such as Ernima pleading to leave in one message. During the trial, Arnima's father, Abu Hayat, said marriage ruined their future. Arnima's mother, Mahfuza, wept as she spoke about her daughter's dream of becoming a doctor. Arnima wanted to save lives, but she couldn't save her own. In a statement read by a support person, Arnima's mother said her life fell apart the day her daughter was murdered. There is no joy, no laughter, only suffering and pain. Her tears are never ending, and the deep ache in her heart never stops, she said. Arnima was stolen not only from their family but from the thousands of people she would have helped as a wonderful medical doctor. She recalled the day Arnima got into medical school as the happiest day of her life. Mahfuza was so overjoyed, she thought her heart would burst. Mahfuza remembered how beautiful her daughter looked the day they received their Australian citizenship and said she would give anything to see her face just one more time. Instead, she sit by Arnima's grave every Friday, stroking the grass, because she can no longer stroke Arnima's hair, she said. In his final statement, Marriage tried to apologize. However, his tone sounded formal, and his words were not backed by genuine emotion. A court-requested psychological evaluation revealed narcissistic and manipulative traits that cast doubt on the sincerity of his remorse. According to prosecutors, Marriage could not accept that Arnima was planning to leave and saw her pregnancy as a shackle rather than a joy. The judge noted that Marriage viewed his wife as property, not as a beloved partner. On December 19, 2024, judgment was entered in this case, sentencing Marriage in the New South Wales Supreme Court. Justice Deborah Sweeney stated that he had acted with reckless indifference to life by either choking or smothering Arnima. Sweeney said she had considered these factors along with Marriage's conduct regarding Arnima's body after her death and that he did not undertake any significant planning or organization in killing Arnima. The judge assessed the offense as being in the mid-range of seriousness for murder and sentenced Marriage Zuffer to 21 years in prison, without the possibility of parole for 16 years. Judge Deborah Sweeney stated that she took into account that he acknowledged his need for rehabilitation. She mentioned that given his youth, his limited prior record, and his attitude, it seemed he had positive prospects for rehabilitation. The judge emphasized that the sentence reflected the severity of the crime, pointing out that not only had he taken the life of an innocent person, but he had also tried to erase her existence. Today, Marriage is being held in a maximum security prison in New South Wales. Wardens report that he avoids contact with other prisoners and spends most of his time in his cell. His lawyer periodically appeals, arguing that the sentence is disproportionately harsh, but so far, all attempts have been unsuccessful. The story of Arnima and Marriage is not only a chronicle of a crime but also a reminder of how tyranny in a relationship can lead to irreversible tragedy. Her life, cut short at the age of 19, became a symbol of the struggle for women's rights. All that Arnima's parents have are memories of their daughter. Every Friday, they visit the cemetery where their daughter's name is engraved on a marble slab, remembering the girl who dreamed of saving lives but couldn't save her own. In January 2024, in northern Chile, a vast and barren desert became the site of a disturbing discovery. Human remains were found buried beneath the sand near the city of Calama, an isolated area where the harsh climate can preserve bodies for a long time. Their thorough examination indicated that the remains had been intentionally hidden. The rocky terrain made digging challenging. Authorities later confirmed that the remains belonged to a woman. Preliminary forensic analysis shows she died from a gunshot wound to the head. Remains identified as those of Javiera Jimenez, who went missing in 2022. Javiera Jimenez grew up in Chile. As the eldest daughter, she developed a strong sense of responsibility early on. Her parents worked diligently to create a comfortable life for their children and instilled values of determination and independence in them. Javiera learned quickly that to succeed, she would need to rely on her own hard work. From a young age, she was known for her energetic and goal-oriented personality. In school, she excelled in academics, especially in math and science. However, her greatest passion was working with people. She had a natural talent for connecting with others. She was always eager to help and foster relationships. As a teenager, Javiera aspired to become a dentist. After finishing high school, she enrolled in college to study dental care, dreaming of becoming a skilled professional and eventually opening her own practice. Determined to advance her career, she balanced her studies with a part-time job as a hostess at a bar, where she welcomed customers and helped create a friendly atmosphere. This job not only provided her with income but also helped her enhance her communication skills. In addition to her studies and work, Javiera was actively building her presence on social media. She began by sharing small posts about her daily life, which garnered a larger audience over time. She collaborated with local brands to promote clothing, cosmetics, and other products. Her charm and engaging personality quickly made her blog popular. Javiera didn't focus only on work and academics. She prioritized personal development, was determined to achieve financial independence. At 18, she moved out of her family home, managed all her living expenses on her own. Her family was proud of her early independence and her ability to overcome challenges. Despite her busy schedule, Javiera always made time for her family, staying close to her mother and brothers, visiting them regularly, and sharing her future aspirations. A stagnant life was never an option for her. She was constantly striving to progress. Before she vanished, she had ambitious plans. She was getting ready to move into a new home, aiming to advance her social media career and continuing her studies. Javiera met Andres Sutter in 2022 through a group of mutual friends she frequently hung out with. Initially, there were no red flags with Andres. He was charming, self-assured, and good at building relationships. He made a strong first impression, appearing considerate, engaged, and truly interested in her life. Soon after, their talks evolved into a romantic relationship. In the beginning, everything felt ideal. He was supportive, encouraged her goals, and admired her independence. However, as time passed, red flags began to appear. Javiera noticed that Andres was excessively jealous. He was uncomfortable with her job at the bar, monitored her interactions, and frequently asked where she was, who she was with. His behavior became increasingly intrusive. He would show up unexpectedly, even when she had told him she was busy. He went through her phone, questioning every new contact. His jealousy became unreasonable. He particularly disliked it when Javiera spent time with friends, especially if men were present. Soon, other troubling issues emerged. Andres was often unclear about his own activities. He didn't have a steady job but always seemed to have money. When she inquired about his work, he avoided giving direct answers. Over time, Javiera discovered that Andres's name was associated with certain groups involved in illegal activities. Among a small circle of friends, rumors circulated that he might be involved in criminal activities, including theft and the illegal trade of copper. The turning point in Javiera and Andres's relationship occurred when Javiera discovered that Andres was living a double life. She wanted nothing to do with illegal activities and didn't want to be involved with someone who could put her in harm's way. Eventually, she decided to end their relationship, stating that she couldn't see a future with him. However, Andres refused to accept her decision. He continued to pursue her, calling her frequently, showing up uninvited, and trying to persuade her to return to him. He dismissed her rejection, believing that she would eventually change her mind. As Javiera started to avoid him, Andres became even more persistent, threatening her by claiming he knew everything about her and wouldn't allow her to leave. Javiera had no idea that their breakup would have serious consequences. On August 26, 2022, Javiera's day began like any other. She and her mother, Gladys Galagillos, went to a shopping mall, had lunch, and discussed the changes coming in Javiera's life. Javiera is moving out. She was excited about this new chapter. During their conversation, Javiera expressed her ambitions for the future. She discussed her goals of advancing her career, increasing her income through social media, and completing her education. Her enthusiasm and drive were evident. Her mother felt happy seeing her daughter so excited. After their outing, they returned home, where Javiera assisted her mother with household chores, then folded the things into the suitcase. Later that evening, before leaving, Javiera mentioned to her mother that she intended to spend the night at a friend's house. This was not unusual, as she often stayed over with friends. Once she arrived, she and her mother continued to text each other, as they usually did. Everything seemed perfectly normal. However, as midnight approached, a text arrived that changed everything. Andres messaged her, "I found your dog." This news was monumental for Javiera, as her dog, Lucky, had been missing for a few days, and she had been searching tirelessly. She had even posted on social media, offering a reward for Lucky's safe return, so she immediately reacted to Andres's message. Then she stopped texting her mom. A few hours later, all attempts to contact her by phone were unsuccessful. The next day, Javiera was expected to come home, but she never arrived. Her family started reaching out to her friends, but no one knew her whereabouts. Her sudden disappearance left her loved ones in distress. They had only two clues: their last conversation with her and a message that later became crucial in the investigation. Javiera's disappearance caused deep concern for her family and friends. However, the one person who seemed unconcerned was Andres. When her mother finally managed to reach him, he responded in a detached manner, showing no signs of worry. When Gladys inquired about her daughter's location, he calmly stated he had no idea and then proceeded to share his version of events. That night, he met with Javiera to help her search for her missing dog. They drove to several places but couldn't find it. To distract her, he suggested going to Calama, his hometown. Javiera agreed. She had a suitcase with her because she was moving the next day, so it seemed she might have intended to stay at his place overnight. However, his account became less clear from there. He claimed they had an argument during the trip. Suddenly, Javiera realized that her suitcase was missing. She thought it might have fallen out of the trunk. Distressed, she insisted they go back to look for it. According to Andres' testimony, he left Javiera at the entrance to the city of Calama while he returned to retrieve a suitcase that fell out of the truck they were both traveling in. This version of events was confusing. Javiera was supposedly left alone on a highway at night, far from the city, without a way to get home or call for help. However, Andres made no effort to persuade her to return to the car, nor did he check if she was safe. Gladys immediately sensed something was wrong with his account. When she pressed him for details, Andres began to contradict himself. At first, he said he had dropped her off near Calama, then he changed it to somewhere on the way back to Antofagasta. He couldn't remember the exact spot, which raised further suspicion. When Gladys asked why he hadn't called her or any of Javiera's friends to inform them that he left her alone at night, Andres hesitated. He said he thought she was just upset and would find her way home. A few hours later, he altered his story again, claiming that he had been in a car accident after leaving Javiera. He said another car had collided with his from behind, and he went to the hospital for a checkup. This, he explained, was why he didn't go back to look for her. Late Saturday night, almost 24 hours after Javiera went missing, her mother received an unexpected and concerning message from an unknown number. It read, "Mom, it's me. I left. There was an accident. I need some time. Don't worry about me. I'll come back once everything is settled. Love you. Take care of Grandma and my brother." Gladys read the message repeatedly, sensing something was amiss. The tone felt distant and impersonal, which alarmed her, but the errors stood out even more. Javiera was always meticulous with her texts, avoiding shortcuts and spelling mistakes. This message, however, was filled with typos and awkward phrasing that didn't match her style. Gladys tried to call the number, but the call failed. The phone had already been turned off, increasing her anxiety. Worried, she showed the message to Javier's friends, and they all agreed Javier would never write something like this. They recognized her usual texting style and emotional expressions. The content of the message was also suspiciously vague. Where was she? What kind of accident had occurred? Why hadn't she provided more details? Why send a cryptic message from an unknown number instead of calling? Gladys took immediate action and reported the message to the police. They documented it as a potential attempt to mislead the investigation and distract from a possible crime. A task force was quickly assigned to the case. Investigators traced the message to its originating SIM card. The phone carrier confirmed it was linked to a false identity, a common method used when buying anonymous prepaid cards. Next, law enforcement tried to locate the phone. They hoped to find its general location, but it had been turned off shortly after the message was sent. The last known signal placed it near Kalama, the same area where Andres claimed to have last seen Javiera. Further examination revealed that the phone had only been used once, suggesting the message was pre-planned and aimed at deceiving her family into believing she had left on her own terms. Experts analyzed the content of the message and found that it did not match Javiera's usual writing style. The errors and unusual phrases were clear indicators that it was not written by her. This finding became a crucial piece of evidence, suggesting that the message was fabricated and indicating that Javiera did not disappear voluntarily. As a result, investigators began treating the case as a potential crime, with Andres emerging as the primary suspect. However, the investigation progressed slowly due to a lack of concrete evidence. Concerned that each passing day without answers diminished their chances of uncovering the truth, Javiera's family and friends initiated their own investigation. They spoke with people familiar with Andres, examined his background, and searched for any links to criminal activity. Soon, they discovered evidence connecting him to illegal operations. Through shared contacts, they found individuals who claimed Andres had participated in stealing copper from trains and was allegedly part of a group that extracted and sold metals on the black market. Furthermore, accounts of his aggressive behavior emerged. Those who knew him described him as having a short temper and a tendency to get into conflicts, often involving physical fights, and inability to tolerate being contradicted. These details increased the family's concerns. If Andres had a history of aggression, he was certainly capable of committing a serious crime, particularly in a moment of rage. Javier's friends recalled that she had confided in them about Andres becoming increasingly controlling and obsessive. They found old messages where she expressed worry that he was tracking her, calling her several times a day, and demanding to know her whereabouts. While her loved ones continued to search for answers, the police conducted a forensic examination of Andres's car. Since he was the last person known to see Javier alive, his truck could contain important evidence. Inside the truck, investigators discovered traces of blood. Initial analysis showed stains on the passenger seat and the interior of the door. They also found fibers that seemed to match the clothing Javier was wearing. The blood samples were sent for DNA testing. A few days later, the results confirmed the worst fears: the blood belonged to Javiera Jimenez. This revelation completely undermined Andres's claim that he had simply dropped her off on the highway. If she had left his truck voluntarily, why was her blood found inside? And if she had been injured, why didn't he report it? Police obtained GPS data from Andres' vehicle, which revealed that on the night Javier disappeared, he was driving towards Kalama. However, instead of taking the main road, he opted for a side road that led into the desert. His car remained in that isolated area for a long time before it continued on its way. This discovery became a significant turning point in the case, leading investigators to suspect that a crime may have taken place there or that evidence was concealed. When Andres learned that the police had received forensic results, he understood that his arrest was imminent. His behavior changed. He ceased communication with everyone, including those he previously trusted. The day before he was scheduled to be questioned by police, he suddenly packed a bag and left his apartment. Surveillance cameras recorded him exiting the building with a small backpack and getting into a car. Neighbors later confirmed that he left in a hurry and did not return. Authorities quickly issued an arrest warrant for him, but by that point, he was already gone. Further investigation showed that Andres had used false documents to cross the border, making him a fugitive. His name was added to an international criminal database, but he managed to evade capture. For Javier's family, the only option was to continue seeking justice and waiting. They believed strongly that he would eventually slip up again. When he did, they were confident that the law would catch up with him. Law enforcement's initial efforts to catch Andres were unsuccessful. They found his abandoned car on the outskirts of Antofagasta, but he was missing, indicating he had carefully planned his escape. Phone records revealed that, just hours before disappearing, he had contacted several people already under investigation for criminal activities, suggesting he used these connections to vanish. Eventually, investigators confirmed that Andres had illegally fled Chile into Bolivia. He avoided official crossings by using lesser-known smuggling routes favored by traffickers. After crossing the border, he adopted a new identity. For months, he successfully evaded capture, fully aware that authorities were searching for him. Despite the challenges in the investigation, Javier's family refused to lose hope. Gladys tirelessly worked to keep the case in the public eye, ensuring that Andres appeared on international wanted lists. The family engaged with the media, raised awareness on social networks, and distributed flyers with his photo, hoping that someone would recognize him and notify the authorities. The turning point in the investigation came when a reward was offered for information that would lead to Andres's capture. The family pledged a generous sum to anyone who could provide credible information about his location. This approach proved effective, as tips began to emerge. By late 2023, reports indicated that Andres had been seen in a Bolivian city, living a secluded life and avoiding attention while keeping limited contact with locals. Bolivian authorities started monitoring his movements. They learned, through informants, that he was using a false identity, taking odd jobs, and avoiding any official documents that might reveal who he really was. However, he could not remain hidden forever. In January 2024, a local resident reported his exact location to the police. Authorities responded quickly, initiating a targeted operation to capture him. They surrounded the building where Andres was hiding. The operation was quick and efficient. He complied with their commands and was apprehended without resistance. During his arrest, he remained calm, seemingly resigned to his situation. This time, there was no way to escape. Andres was officially in custody and would soon face justice in Chile. After confirming his arrest, Bolivian authorities began the process of extraditing Andres back to Chile. Within days, he was returned to face trial, allowing Javier's family to see the person responsible for their daughter's death held accountable. However, this was just the start of a long battle for them, as they were determined to push for the harshest possible sentence. Once in Chile, Andres was placed in a detention facility, marking a new phase in the investigation. With the main suspect in custody, authorities had a chance to uncover the answers they had sought for over a year and a half. Initially, he refused to cooperate, denying any involvement in Javier's disappearance. However, investigators were ready, armed with evidence linking him to the crime. As the pressure increased, he eventually admitted. His confession lacked any sign of remorse or justification, delivered as if stating a simple fact. He neither portrayed himself as a victim nor showed any regret, maintaining a disturbingly calm demeanor as he spoke. The information he provided directly contradicted his earlier statements. He confessed that he hadn't originally intended to harm Javier, but after she refused to reconcile and ended their relationship for good, he made a choice he never planned to take back. He tricked her by claiming he had found her lost dog. Trusting him and unaware of what was about to happen, she agreed to meet him. He stated that the crime occurred late at night on a deserted highway. He stopped under the false pretense of looking for a missed suitcase that he claimed had fallen from the trunk. When Javier got out of the truck, he struck her with a fatal blow. Afterwards, he drove further into the desert, dug a shallow grave, and buried her body, thinking that the harsh environment would eliminate all evidence. The day after his confession, investigators began searching for the burial site using the coordinates given by Andres. In mid-January 2024, they found human remains in a shallow grave covered with sand. Now, forensic specialists begin the identification process. A few days later, forensic tests confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Javiera Jimenez. Although the search had ended, the fight for justice was just beginning. His family urged the court to impose the harshest sentence possible on Andres. After his confession, the case was brought to court. There was no doubt about his guilt. His own words, along with the evidence and the discovery of Javier's body, made that clear. It was now the court's responsibility to decide his punishment. Javier's family insists on the harshest penalty, life in prison without parole. They were convinced that he posed a threat to society. For Javiera's mother, true justice guaranteed Andres will never have the chance to re-offend. The prosecution presented all relevant evidence in court, with experts confirming that the crime was premeditated. They highlighted the misleading invitation, the choice to take her to a remote area, and the complete absence of any effort to help her, all of which indicated a well-planned act. Forensic specialists documented injuries that disproved any claims of accidental harm. Nevertheless, the defense sought a lighter sentence, arguing that their client had confessed, volunteered, and aided in locating the remains, which they claimed to have cooperated with the investigation. They requested leniency based on this argument, which angered Javier's family. They believed it was clear that Andres's confession was not out of remorse. He only admitted the truth when he had no other choice. He felt no guilt and was merely trying to lessen his sentence. The trial lasted several weeks, during which Gladys participated every session, watching everything unfold. Although she remains composed, her determination was evident in her eyes. Furthermore, in a similar fashion to the disappearance of Javiera Jimenez in August 2022, Andres is also being investigated for being a member of a violent armed gang that steals copper while it is being transported on FCAB trains. Similar crimes were committed by other members of the gang, and the prosecution was able to establish Andres Sutter's involvement through photographs, text messages, and statements from other criminals. In both cases, the court set different investigation dates. For the murder, he was sentenced to 90 days, and for the armed robbery and the copper cathode theft, he was sentenced to 60 days. In addition, Andres remains in custody awaiting trial. Sofia Maria Martinez was born on November 14, 1981, in El Paso, Texas. Her parents, Juan and Maria, immigrated from Mexico in the late 1970s in search of a better life. They worked multiple jobs to support their daughters. She grew up alongside her two sisters, her older sister Dulce and her younger sister Marianne. Since a young age, they have shared a close bond. When Sofia was 12, family tensions arose, and her parents divorced in 1995. Three sisters live with their mother, who later remarried a successful man named Iladio and had two sons with him. Meanwhile, Juan began a new family, leading to reduced contact with his daughters from his first marriage. Despite this, Sofia did not hold any resentment toward her father and developed a good relationship with her stepfather. Sofia grew up to be kind, outgoing, and compassionate, often helping her mother with the younger children and providing them with support. She had a particularly strong bond with her younger sister, and they were best friends. At 15, Sofia took a part-time job as a sales associate at a local mall, saving money diligently over the years. She dreamed of owning a bright red Pontiac. Knowing about her dream, her mother and stepfather gifted her the remaining amount she needed to buy the car when she turned 18. In November 1999, Sofia proudly drove her brand new car off the dealership lot, a vehicle she had long admired. She took great care of it, keeping it clean inside and out, and drove it carefully. The car was a source of pride for her, and she never allowed anyone else to drive it. By the year 2000, Sofia was preparing for her graduation and was excited about the upcoming senior prom. She carefully selected the perfect dress, shoes, and accessories for the big night. Weekends were spent shopping with her sister, trying on outfits, planning hairstyles, and choosing makeup. In February, the senior yearbook photos were taken, capturing students in their graduation caps and gowns, and Sofia was filled with joy, eager to start college. She planned to pursue a history major at the prestigious University of Texas, with the ambition of becoming a teacher. Unfortunately, Sofia's dreams would never be realized. Although she had many friends, she had never been in a serious relationship. She focused on her schoolwork and job rather than dating. While she sometimes accepted invitations from boys interested in her, none of those dates turned into anything significant. In early March, her co-worker Justin suggested setting her up on a blind date with a friend of his. After some initial hesitation, she agreed, and they planned to meet on the evening of Friday, March 10th. They decided to go to a popular nightclub that allowed entry to those 18 and older, unlike most places that required patrons to be 21. On the evening of March 10th, 2000, Sophia hurried home from school, excited to prepare for her blind date. She tried on at least 10 different outfits, stepping out each time for her family's feedback. Ultimately, they all agreed she looked stunning in a bright red evening dress that flattered her figure while remaining elegant and modest. She applied her makeup, styled her hair in soft curls, put on a pair of heels, and carried a small clutch bag. The final touch was her favorite perfume. By 10 p.m., she was completely ready. She entered the living room looking glamorous and twirled to show off her outfit. Her family was impressed, confident that she would make a great impression. She promised to be home no later than 2 a.m. since she had a work shift at the mall the next day, and no one was particularly worried. She was responsible and always kept her promises. At 10:10 p.m., Sophia left the house with a bright smile, climbed into her beloved red Pontiac, and waved goodbye to her family as they watched from the window. None of them could have imagined that it would be the last time they saw her alive. The following morning, her younger sister Mary peeked into her room and noticed something odd. She was missing, and her bed was not just neatly made, it looked untouched. It seemed she had left for work, yet her employee badge sat on the vanity, and her usual work shoes were in the corner by the closet. Mary informed her mother, and at that moment, the phone rang. It was a call from Sophia's employer, reporting that she hadn't shown up for her shift, something unprecedented. This alarmed Sophia's family, who were unsure about what to do next. Since she didn't have a cell phone, her family started calling the landlines of her friends, classmates, and co-workers. Unfortunately, no one had seen her since the previous night, and they did not know how to contact the boys she was with. They also reached out to local hospitals, worried that she might have been in an accident. By the evening, without any updates on her whereabouts, the family decided to go to the police to report her missing. They took a recent photo of her and provided a detailed description of her outfit when she left home, as well as specific information about the car she was driving. On Saturday, March 11th, police made a disturbing discovery in the New Mexico desert. They found an abandoned red Pontiac about 100 yards off the highway connecting Texas and New Mexico. The passenger side window had a bullet hole, and there were dark, dried stains resembling blood on the seat, steering wheel, and headrest. Experienced officers quickly suspected foul play and feared that the driver might be seriously injured or worse. The car was sent to a forensic lab for analysis. However, since the discovery occurred in a different state, law enforcement struggled to find a direct connection to Sophia. After checking the car's registration, authorities confirmed that the red Pontiac belonged to Maria Martinez from Texas. They contacted her to see if the car had been stolen and to find out that it had been driven by her daughter, Sophia, who had been reported missing the previous day. The family was baffled as to how Sophia's car ended up abandoned in a desert in a neighboring state and where she might be. Maria emphasized that her daughter cherished her car and would never have left it behind, suggesting that something terrible must have happened. One theory was that the vehicle had been hijacked and that Sophia might have been harmed, but there was still hope that she could be found alive. However, with no leads in sight, law enforcement was unsure where to begin their search. On Sunday, March 12, a group of teenagers walking near the outskirts of El Paso spotted something shiny in the desert and decided to investigate. As they got closer, they found the lifeless body of a young woman in a red evening dress. They hurried home to tell their parents, who called the police. Forensic investigators arrived at the scene within an hour. Officers discovered the young woman lying on her back, her face so disfigured that she was unidentifiable. Her dress was soaked in blood and covered with sand. Although no identification was found, police believed they had discovered the body of a girl named Sophia, who had been reported missing 2 days earlier. When Sophia's family was informed that a body had been found in the desert, her mother, Maria, refused to accept it, convinced that there had been a mistake and that her daughter was still alive. Her doubts disappeared when detectives showed her a photograph taken from the victim's bra. The picture showed Sophia holding her youngest brother, which confirmed her identity, as it was known that Sophia often carried photos of her siblings in her wallet. In her final moments, she had placed one close to her heart. The autopsy revealed that she had died from multiple gunshot wounds to the head, having been shot 5 times in the face. One bullet traveled through her head and was later found in the sand at the crime scene. The severity of her injuries left her with no chance of survival. Additionally, there were clear signs of a struggle, including severe bruising and indications of physical violence. The inner surfaces of her thighs were bruised and scratched, and forensic examinations confirmed internal injuries consistent with an assault. DNA analysis also provided biological evidence, and defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she had fought fiercely for her life but ultimately was overpowered. None of Sophia's personal belongings were found, except for a photograph she had hidden in her clothing. Due to the severity of her injuries, her identity could only be confirmed through DNA testing, as even dental records proved ineffective. Toxicology reports later revealed that there were no substances in her system at the time of death. Investigators discovered several shoe prints near the body. While most were unclear, one distinct impression helped forensic analysts identify the size and tread pattern of the sole. Authorities found only Sophia's fingerprints inside her car. Although her purse was recovered from the vehicle, the perpetrator had taken her license, keys, and cash. Her family was advised to change their locks and install a security system because the killer had access to her home address from her ID and had her keys. Her family followed these recommendations but lived in constant fear that the person responsible for her death might target someone else. DNA samples from the biological evidence left by the attacker were uploaded into the National Criminal Database, but no matches were found. This indicated that the suspect likely had no prior criminal record, complicating the investigation. Authorities also considered the possibility that the suspect was a transient who had crossed illegally from Mexico, committed the crime, and then fled back, making him even harder to track. A crucial lead emerged when investigators learned that Sophia had gone on a blind date the night she disappeared, arranged by a coworker. They sought to question both men involved. Since her family did not have their contact information, officers visited her workplace at the mall. Justin, the coworker who set up the date, was on shift that day and agreed to go to the station for questioning. The second man, Marcus, was also interviewed. During the interview, Justin explained that he had planned to meet Sophia at the club, but she never arrived. He and Marcus waited for her until around midnight before they left. He only learned that Sophia was missing the next day when she didn't show up for work. Both Justin and Marcus took polygraph tests to verify their statements, provided DNA samples, and turned over the shoes they wore that night. The results showed no connection to the crime, and their alibis were strong, as many people had seen them at the club. During a closer examination of Sophia's car, officers discovered a crumpled ATM receipt that had slipped under the driver's seat. The receipt indicated that at 10:23 p.m., she had withdrawn $20 from an ATM located just a few blocks from her residence. This detail became a crucial lead, as the ATM and nearby buildings had surveillance cameras. Investigators reviewed the footage from all available cameras and were shocked by what they found. The crime had been recorded from multiple angles, which helped them understand the sequence of events. At 10:22 p.m., a red Pontiac arrived at the ATM. The driver's side window was rolled down, and a young woman was seen withdrawing $20 from her account. The footage clearly showed that she was alone in the car. After taking the cash, Sophia paused for a moment to apply lipstick using her compact mirror. At that point, a figure dressed entirely in black, with a hood obscuring his face, crept up behind her car. She did not see him until he reached her window. Without warning, he pulled out a gun and attacked her in the head. His intention was not to kill her but to intimidate. The bullet grazed her cheek, clipped her nose, and exited from the passenger side window. Shortly afterward, despite her injury and holding a tissue to her bleeding face, Sophia withdrew another $200 from her account. The car then began to drive away from the ATM with the assailant now inside, holding a gun to the back of her head. Within seconds, the vehicle was out of view of the camera, and what happened next is unknown. It's essential to note that this took place in the early 2000s, a time when surveillance camera quality was not very advanced. The footage was grainy and lacked detail, making it impossible to produce a composite sketch of the suspect. All that could be discerned was that the attacker was a white male of average height with a slim build, possibly sporting facial hair. This information, along with video clips of the attack, was shared on local television to alert residents of the danger and encourage anyone who recognized the suspect to come forward. The investigation was lengthy and frustrating. After a news segment aired, police received numerous calls, but none of them provided useful information. As time passed, the investigation slowed, no new evidence surfaced, leaving authorities with more questions than answers. At the end of March, a man contacted the police, stating that he had found a driver's license near the spot where Sophia's body had been discovered 2 weeks earlier. The license belonged to a local woman, raising concerns that she might also have been a victim. However, when the police reached out to her, they learned she was safe and had not been harmed. She explained that her purse had been stolen earlier that month at a mall, where Sophia had also worked. Investigators believed the suspect could have been stalking potential victims and shared this warning with the media to alert other women. The very next day, a young man came forward, admitting to stealing the purse. He panicked after seeing the news and worried that police might link him to a crime he hadn't committed. He willingly provided a DNA sample and was cleared as a suspect in Sophia's case. By July 2000, the investigation had hit a dead end. To help generate new leads, authorities announced a $10,000 reward for information leading to the capture of the killer. Shortly after, Sophia's family launched a fundraising campaign to increase the reward amount, garnering support from friends, concerned citizens, and local organizations. By August, the reward for information had risen to $55,000. However, 6 months had passed since the tragedy, and no new leads had surfaced. Then, on September 30, 2000, a young woman named Heather Napa called the police, claiming she knew who was responsible for Sophia's death and wanted to share information in exchange for the reward money. Although there had been many false tips before, Heather claimed to have physical evidence. Heather, a 20-year-old mother of 2, alleged that her boyfriend, Michael Jacques, and their friend, William Berkeley, were involved in the crime. To support her claims, she provided a charred driver's license that belonged to Sofia Martinez. She explained that she had been afraid to come forward sooner due to fear of retaliation, but with Michael recently jailed and having no means to support her children, she decided to speak up for both the investigation and the reward. At that time, Heather was hospitalized for kidney issues, while Michael and William were both unemployed and struggling financially. On March 10, William visited her in the hospital and pulled Michael aside for a private conversation. Heather overheard parts of their discussion and realized they were planning something illegal, which she assumed was related to their previous dealings with banned substances. She didn't probe for further details. Shortly afterward, they left, taking a box of latex gloves from a medical supply cabinet. Later that night, around 11 p.m., Michael returned to Heather's hospital room and claimed they had obtained some money. He said he had hidden near an ATM and signaled to William when a single driver approached. After the driver withdrew cash, William allegedly threatened her with a gun, took the money, and ordered her to get out of the car before driving away. Detectives were aware that this account did not match the actual crime, but they allowed Heather to continue. After midnight, a nurse informed Michael that William was waiting for him downstairs. They then left in separate cars, drove to a neighboring state, abandoned the Pontiac in the desert, and returned home in Michael's car. The next day, Heather was released from the hospital and felt anxious about whether the victim would report the crime. To reassure her, William showed her Sophia's driver's license, which noted down Sophia's home address. He casually mentioned that they could intimidate the victim into silence if necessary. Then, without hesitation, he threw the license into a smoldering grill and watched it melt before going to bed. A few days later, Heather watched a news report about Sophia's case and had a realization. She recognized William from the ATM surveillance footage and understood why he had altered his appearance by shaving off his beard and head. When she asked Michael about his involvement, he told her to keep quiet. Heather retrieved the burned license plate from the grill and hid it. She also noticed that Michael had a set of car keys with a Pontiac keychain, although she was unsure of what had happened to them. In August, William left home, and in September, Michael was arrested for distributing banned substances. By that time, feeling safer, Heather decided to come forward and find a way to earn money by providing information to the police. After Heather's statement, investigators brought in 23-year-old Michael Jacques for questioning. Surprisingly, he acknowledged his involvement and agreed to tell his version of events. He claimed that he had nothing to do with Sophia's death but admitted that he helped William cover it up. Michael explained that he and William were in desperate need of money and planned to rob someone at an ATM. When they saw a young girl in a red Pontiac at the ATM, Michael wanted to call off the robbery. However, William misunderstood his actions as a signal to proceed. Although Michael knew William had a gun, he never thought it would be used. The situation quickly escalated, and before Michael realized what was happening, the car sped away. He waited for about 30 minutes, but when William didn't return, he went back to the hospital to be with Heather. Michael insisted that he didn't know what happened to Sophia afterward and denied any knowledge of the assault or murder. However, he confessed to helping dispose of the car. He later learned more information but chose not to report William, aware that he too would face repercussions. A key piece of evidence, a set of car keys, was later found on the roof of Michael's house, exactly where he had thrown them. William Berkeley, the main suspect in the case, was arrested at his parents' home in early October. At just 20 years old, he had no criminal record, but those who knew him reported a pattern of aggression and cruelty dating back to his school years. He had previously assaulted classmates, former girlfriends, and even his mother, yet none of them had reported these incidents to the police. Despite this violent history, William was a talented artist whose work had been showcased in galleries. During his first interrogation, he admitted to robbing and killing Sophia, claiming he needed the money, but he avoided specifics. He insisted that their encounter was consensual and stated that the shooting was accidental. As interrogations progressed and he understood the seriousness of the accusations, he changed his narrative. He began to portray himself as a victim, claiming he was part of a plan led by Michael. William said that Michael had selected the car, believing the owner of a Pontiac would have substantial funds. Unfortunately for them, Sophia only had $220, which they viewed as the price for her life. In the lead-up to the trial, William and Michael tried to shift the blame onto each other, but the evidence presented against William was compelling. Authorities found the murder weapon, a handgun, at his home. His DNA was found on Sophia, and a pair of sneakers matching the footprints at the crime scene were found in his bedroom. On April 7, 2002, William was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death by lethal injection, which was carried out in the spring of 2010. Throughout the years before his execution, he showed no remorse for his actions. Michael Jacques was also found guilty on November 3, 2002, of conspiracy and evidence tampering, receiving a life sentence with the chance of parole after 40 years. Heather, who had been promised a $55,000 reward, received the money but found no joy in it. She lost custody of her children and, at the age of 35, died from complications related to a chronic kidney condition. Bree Kristen Kuhn was born in May 1987 in the United States and grew up with her parents and her older brother, Eric. The family lived in Pennsylvania until her parents divorced. Following the divorce, Bree and Eric moved to Texas with their mother, whose name has not been disclosed. When Eric entered 9th grade, Bree left Texas to live with their father in New York. At that time, their father was in a new relationship with a woman named Karen. Though Bree and her brother Eric lived apart, they remained close, staying in touch on important occasions. However, their relationship with their mother became strained over time. According to Eric, their mother was physically abusive, and Bree would often defend him. She took on the role of a protector, enduring the abuse herself to keep her brother safe. These traumatic experiences profoundly affected Bree, leading her to struggle with depression and anxiety throughout her adolescence. By the age of 13, she had attempted to end her life. In the face of adversity, Bree focused on her education, attending 2 community colleges. While still young, she enlisted in the U.S. Navy, where she served for 17 years at various naval stations across the country. In 2009, she welcomed her first child, a daughter named Kay, with her then-partner, James. Although their relationship ended, Bree retained custody of Kay, while James was granted weekend visitation rights. She later began a relationship with Colin Turner, a fellow service member in the military. Colin James Turner, born on December 28, 1987, was raised in a close-knit, religious family alongside his parents, Tierva Donald Turner, and his sisters, Nicole and Rebecca. Known for his warmth and strong family values, Colin served in the Marine Corps with a specialization in explosive ordnance disposal. He married Casey Gatzman in 2009, and they had a son that same year. After the separation, custody of the children went to Casey, but Colin remained actively involved in his son's care and life. On May 29, 2016, Colin married Bree, and together they started a family with Bree's daughter, Kay. Colin embraced the role of Kay's father, treating her as his own, which deeply endeared her to his family. In April 2017, Bree and Colin welcomed their son, John Patrick, followed by their daughter, Lonnie, in August 2018. After 14 years of service, Colin retired from the Marines and began studying electrical engineering at Arizona State University. He also managed to balance his studies with his responsibilities as a parent, such as helping Kay with distance learning. By this time, the family had settled in Gulf Breeze, Florida, a community recognized for its safety and family-friendly environment. Despite outward appearances of stability, underlying issues were present in Bree and Colin's relationship. She confided to her brother, Eric, that her relationship with Colin was strained. When Eric visited to help mediate, Colin reportedly joked, both privately and in front of Bree, that they got along because they were both narcissistic psychopaths. Eric also noticed Bree felt burdened as the family's sole financial provider, while Colin focused on his studies and childcare. Although Eric encouraged Bree to leave the relationship, she hesitated. Her concerns include that Colin could use her mental health history and his family's finances to gain a legal advantage in a custody battle. In April 2021, she attempted to end her life by overdosing on pills and alcohol while speaking on the phone with Eric. Panicked, Eric contacted Colin, who was at home with Bree but reportedly did not help her. He ultimately called emergency services, and she was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility for 10 days. A month later, she returned to the facility for another week. During her recovery, Bree attributed much of her emotional distress to job-related stress and accused Colin of interfering with her work, which she said exacerbated her difficulties. However, she never publicly accused him of psychological, physical, or emotional abuse. After her hospitalization, she joined an intensive outpatient program and resumed her career at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. In her role as an assistant to the command chief, Bree was able to continue her treatment while serving under limited-duty sailor status. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Bree began seeking legal assistance. On Wednesday, September 8, 2021, she reached out to a group of mothers on a messaging app, asking for recommendations for a lawyer. She mentioned that the situation could escalate, as it involved disputes over children and property. At 12:53 p.m. that same day, Bree called 911 to report a domestic dispute with her husband, Colin, and requested police assistance at their home. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived at the scene. Colin, her husband, was calmly sitting in a beach chair at the end of the driveway. He informed the officers that Bree had a shotgun, a pistol in the bedroom, and admitted that he also had a firearm in his truck. Colin emphasized that Bree was the one who had called the police. When the officers asked about her whereabouts, he led one of them to the home's entrance and pointed toward the kitchen. As the officer entered, Bree's young son approached, curiously asking about the officer's equipment. Shortly afterward, Bree appeared, looking visibly frustrated. The police officer explained that they could not intervene immediately unless there were obvious injuries or specific evidence of violence. Bree responded bitterly, sarcastically stating that she would make things clearer next time. The officer attempted to de-escalate the situation, explaining that without a court order or restraining order, they could not prevent Colin from seeing or taking the children, especially since 2 of them were biologically his. When asked if she wanted to file a formal complaint, she declined, saying she just wanted to leave the house with her children. The officer informed her that he would speak to Colin while she gathered her belongings. While the officers were speaking with Colin, Bree began transferring items from Colin's truck to hers. Noticing this, Colin firmly stated that he would not allow her to take the children. He argued that he was their primary caregiver and claimed that he intended to take them to his parents' home in Georgia for a few days to let tensions cool down. He also denied having any intention of keeping the children away from Bree. One of the officers advised Colin that, as long as no violence was involved, parenting disputes were not matters for police intervention. When asked if he wanted to file a formal report, he agreed. The officers retrieved paperwork from their patrol vehicle and provided forms to both parties. When Bree saw her form, she asked what she should do if her husband hit her after they left. The officer advised her to use her phone's camera to document any evidence. The officers then departed. A few hours later, around 5 p.m., there was another 911 call from their home, this time from Colin. When the police arrived again, they found Colin outside, holding the youngest child. He told the officers that Bree was refusing to let him back into the house. She then went outside and tried to take the child from his arms. The officers intervened and asked Bree to go back inside to allow for a calm discussion. After confirming that Colin lived in and co-owned the house, an officer informed him that he had the legal right to enter the property, though they discouraged him from using force. The officer emphasized that Colin's access to the home was a lawful right. Concerned about another confrontation, he requested that the officer accompany him inside. Colin explained that Bree had attempted to take the child into the house, but the child had started screaming, refusing to go in without him. When the officer asked if any physical conflict had occurred, Colin said no but mentioned that the situation was part of a long-standing dispute that had lasted for years. Bree, on the other hand, told the officers that they were discussing divorce and claimed Colin intended to take the children to Georgia. She further accused him of being physically aggressive, adding that the earlier police visit had failed to protect her. She also alleged that Colin had contacted her superiors at work and possibly made claims of emotional abuse. The officer reiterated to Bree that she could not legally prevent Colin from entering his own home. He suggested they work out a temporary arrangement, such as staying in separate bedrooms and minimizing contact, for the well-being of their children. However, Bree refused, expressing concern that allowing Colin inside could lead to more violence. She again brought up her previous allegations of abuse and expressed fear of being harmed. The officer advised her to document any future incidents, but it was clear Bree was seeking more than just advice. She wanted protection that the current system was not equipped to provide. When the officer suggested that everyone enter the house together, Bree refused. The officer then turned to Colin, who calmly provided the children's information. During the exchange, he mentioned Bree's mental health issues. Police confirmed this and said that he had previously intervened in an incident at their home in March, when Bree attempted to harm herself. Police reminded Colin of the same advice they had previously given him, to remain separated within the home for the safety of everyone involved. He also pointed out that standing outside in the intense heat with a small child amidst biting mosquitoes was unsustainable. Before heading inside again, Colin asked the officer to retrieve his wallet, which Bree had allegedly taken from his vehicle. At the door, Bree met the officer. When asked about the wallet, she denied having it and claimed she had only taken Colin's credit card. The officer reminded her that a wallet is personal property, not something to be shared in marriage, and instructed her to return it if she had taken it. In a calm but firm tone, the officer told Bree she had to allow Colin and their daughter back into the house. Bree agreed, but only on the condition that Colin would not harass her or the children. The officer reassured her that if anything happened, she could call them again. As the officer prepared to leave, he returned to inform Colin that Bree claimed she did not know where the wallet was. Colin just smiled and implied that he would let the matter slide. But in reality, nothing was resolved satisfactorily. Less than 2 hours later, at exactly 6:22 p.m., a third and final 911 call came from their residence. Colin James Turner, just 33 years old, had been fatally shot. The final fatal gunshot rang out while the 911 operator was still on the line. On the porch, officers found Bree, then 34, sitting calmly. As they approached, she spontaneously confessed that she had shot her husband. She was taken into custody without resistance. When asked about the children, she said she had taken them to a neighbor who lived a few houses down. Paramedics checked her over while officers ensured that she was physically stable. When asked if she could breathe properly or needed medical care, she didn't respond, so emergency personnel were instructed to evaluate her. Bree was brought to the police station for questioning. The interrogation was slow, interrupted by long silences and frequent bouts of crying. During the interview, Bree opened up about the state of her marital relationship. She said Colin was the primary caregiver for their children and admitted that she believed she had little chance of winning custody due to her history of mental health struggles. She revealed that Colin had threatened to take the children to Georgia and had physically assaulted her. He had also warned that if she reported him, no one would believe her because of her mental health issues, calling her crazy. Bree confessed that she had removed the batteries from the garage door opener to stop Colin from leaving with the children. She claimed that Colin only pretended to care about her mental health as a way to manipulate her, especially after she decided to file for divorce. She mentioned that she had a legal appointment scheduled for the next day. She also mentioned that she had an appointment with a lawyer scheduled for the next day. When asked what had happened just before the attack, Bree said her memory after the second police visit was hazy. She recalled Colin attempting to enter the house through the garage but failing because the way was blocked. However, she said he then used a side door to enter the house. She claimed she tried to stop him, but her next clear memory was knocking on a neighbor's door. She remembered leaving her children there to ensure their safety before returning home to help her husband. Investigators pressed her for a more comprehensive account, but she could only provide scattered details. She said she returned to the garage and saw blood everywhere. Throughout the questioning, Bree repeatedly asked to call her father. Eventually, she was allowed to make the call, which lasted 18 minutes and consisted mostly of sobbing. Her father tried to comfort her, suggesting she would likely spend the night in jail and urging her to seek help if she felt like harming herself again. He reassured her that things could improve and told her to stay strong and look for hope. Toward the end of the call, Bree asked if her father could take custody of her two youngest children. He didn't give a definitive answer, suggesting instead that they would need to discuss it with Colin's mother. He also advised her to cooperate with a public defender if necessary until a more suitable legal option became available. At the end of the call, Bree painfully confesses she doesn't know what's worse, knowing that Colin is dead or realizing that she was the one who killed him. A month later, in early October 2021, Bree was indicted by a Santa Rosa County grand jury for first-degree premeditated murder in connection to the death of her husband, Colin. Prosecutors had not yet decided whether to seek life imprisonment or the death penalty. On October 16, Colin's family and friends gathered for a military funeral to honor his 14 years of service in the U.S. Marine Corps. During the ceremony, the American flag symbolizing his service was presented to his eldest son, Brody Turner. The youngest children of his were adopted by his parents, who always strived to love and support him despite enduring an irreparable loss. After 3 years of delays, Bree's long-awaited trial began on Tuesday, September 24, 2024, at the Santa Rosa County Courthouse. Now 37 years old, Bree faced accusations of committing a premeditated and calculated act of murder. The prosecution carefully outlined the events of September 8, 2021, arguing that Bree intentionally killed her husband following a day of escalating conflict. Meanwhile, the defense presented a drastically different narrative, asserting that Bree was a victim of battered woman syndrome. They argued that she had endured years of psychological and emotional abuse from Colin, who had become increasingly unstable after suffering a traumatic brain injury during his military service. The defense maintained that he posed a significant threat to her and their children. Over 4 days, the court heard testimony from various witnesses. The jury and those in the courtroom reviewed full body cam footage from responding officers, which captured their interactions on the day of the incident. The recordings revealed Bree's sarcasm, Colin's calm demeanor, and the chilling 911 call during which gunshots were recorded in real time. Every officer involved testified, including one officer who described the crime scene in detail, recounting the site of the garage, blood, Colin's body slumped in a chair and a holstered weapon nearby. A crime scene analyst presented a series of photographs to help jurors visualize where Colin's body was found. Evidence collected included shell casings, bullet fragments, and Colin's phone, which was still connected to the 911 operator, lying beneath him. Prescriptions for Bree's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and mental health treatment were submitted as evidence, along with testimony from her supervisor, Craig Forum, from the Pensacola Naval Station. Craig explained that Bree had been placed on limited duty due to mental health issues. He said that on the day of the shooting, Bree did not show up for work, and Colin called him to inform him that Bree had cut off the family's financial access and damaged the electronics in the house. Colin also told Craig that she had missed therapy sessions and that he was considering moving the children to Georgia. Craig testified that Colin remained calm and spoke in a composed manner throughout the call. He also provided Colin with contact information for a family counselor. Soon after, he spoke to Bree, who accused her husband of lying and being unreasonable in taking the children away. On the trial's second day, forensic pathologist Dr. Diana Oleski was called to testify for the prosecution. Although she did not personally perform Colin's autopsy, she reviewed the results and formed her conclusion. The autopsy revealed that Colin had been shot 4 times, all from behind. The bullets entered between his shoulders and chest. One particularly devastating shot passed through his left shoulder, exited the side of his neck, and lodged in his right wrist. The injuries caused extensive trauma, including punctured lungs, fractured ribs, damage to cervical vertebrae, a ruptured spleen, spinal cord injuries, and damage to the pericardium, the heart's protective membrane. Diana concluded that Colin would have survived for only a few minutes following the pericardial injury. When the defense attorney asked if there was any evidence to indicate that Colin's arm was broken, since he had claimed during the 911 call that Bree had tried to break his arm, Diana responded that there were no signs of injuries consistent with that statement. Eric, Bree's brother, was the next to testify. He recounted a phone conversation with Bree months earlier, on the day she attempted to end her life. During that call, she told him she had taken pills mixed with alcohol. Eric stated that when he informed Colin of this, Colin showed no concern and took no action to help, prompting Eric to step in and call for assistance. Eric also mentioned that Bree had always feared losing her children, believing Colin's family's wealth and legal resources would work against her. On the day of the attack, Eric said Bree was especially anxious because she had an upcoming surgery and feared that Colin would use that time to take the children. He recalled speaking to Bree several times that day, noting her mood alternated between calm and distressed. During their final 45-minute call, Eric said he overheard Bree arguing with Colin, followed by shouting and the sound of objects being thrown. He claimed that Bree had then picked up a weapon. When asked how Eric knew this, he hesitated, saying he believed Bree had told him. Eric begged her to leave with the children, but she didn't listen. The call ended with Bree saying that she was not going to take the kids, followed by the sound of gunshots, crying children, and Bree repeatedly saying that she had killed him and that she needed to call the police. However, Eric's testimony was inconsistent under cross-examination. His account differed from his initial statements to detectives in Pennsylvania. He attributed these contradictions to the claim that his first interview had not been recorded, a claim the detective denied. With that, the prosecution rested its case. The defense initially planned to present Bree's defense through testimony from a mental health expert and Bree herself to explain battered woman syndrome. However, they unexpectedly changed strategy, opting not to present these testimonies and offering no public explanation for their decision. Instead, the defense called James, Bree's ex-husband and the father of her eldest daughter, Kay. James testified about the incident on the day of the shooting. He stated that he exchanged text messages with Colin and later received a phone call from Bree. During the call, Bree had told him that he needed to come get Kay and that she had just shot Colin. When he had asked why, she had responded that she didn't know. James immediately went to pick up his daughter. James also testified in court that he had always thought highly of Colin as a stepfather and that Kay had spoken positively about him. On the third day of the trial, proceedings were interrupted by a hurricane warning, delaying closing arguments until Friday, September 27th. During the prosecution's closing argument, they emphasized that Bree showed no visible injuries on the day of the shooting. They argued that Bree deliberately provoked Colin, secretly filmed the confrontation on her phone, and kept her brother on the line during the incident. They contended that her motive was not self-defense but a desire to assert control. The prosecution concluded that, being unable to provoke aggression from Colin, Bree attacked him 4 times in the back without realizing he was on a 911 call. The defense argued that Colin had been walking around the house with a firearm and suggested he hid the weapon in his truck before police arrived. They referenced Colin's 911 call, where he claimed Bree tried to break his arm, a claim contradicted by the autopsy. One of the defense attorneys mocked Colin's actions during the call, asserting that, as a Marine, he should have handled the situation differently, further implying that his response would have been ridiculed by others in his military unit. The defense ultimately claimed that Bree resorted to attacking Colin because law enforcement had repeatedly failed to protect her despite her pleas for help. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. During the sentencing hearing, the judge allowed Colin's parents to speak about the impact of the incident. Colin's mother expressed gratitude for having custody of her grandchildren and stated her intent to adopt them. She condemned Bree not only for taking her son's life but also for attempting to tarnish his reputation. Colin's father spoke of his sadness and disappointment in Bree's actions, sharing that the children were doing well in school and surrounded by love. The judge then sentenced Bree Kristen Kuhn to life in prison. Although the verdict has been announced, the case is not over yet. On October 3, 2024, Bree's legal team filed an appeal with the Florida Court of Appeals, challenging her conviction and requesting a new trial. Meanwhile, Bree was discharged from the U.S. Navy with a general discharge under honorable conditions after 17 years of service, thus avoiding further military disciplinary action. Brenda Michaela Gordillo was born on May 16, 1995, in Catamarca, Argentina. She is the only girl in a family of 3 children, with 2 older brothers, Yvonne and Federico. She also shared an especially close bond with her mother, Florin. She was a bright, organized, and responsible student, known for her friendly personality and ability to mediate conflicts. This aptitude eventually inspired her to pursue a career in psychology. As a child, Brenda participated in activities such as gymnastics, dancing, and acting in school plays, thoroughly enjoying her time on stage. She built many friendships and was well-liked for her helpful advice and understanding. After high school, she was accepted into a prestigious university in Buenos Aires, where she studied psychology with a specialization in negotiation and conflict resolution. A standout student, she consistently earned praise from her professors, who envisioned a bright future for her. She had plans to stay in the capital and build her career there. However, her life took an unexpected turn. During her second-to-last year of college, Brenda received heartbreaking news. Her father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The loss deeply affected her family, particularly her mother, who was left alone in their family home. By that time, Brenda's brothers had moved out and started their own families, while she remained in Buenos Aires, completing her degree. After graduating, Brenda returned to Catamarca to live with and support her mother. She found a job and decided to further her education by enrolling in law school at a local university. Returning to student life, she formed new friendships, one of which was with a young man named Naim Vera. Naim was born on June 11, 1999 in Catamarca, into a prestigious and wealthy family with a tradition of practicing medicine. His father was a renowned cardiac surgeon, and his mother ran a private pediatric practice. As the younger of 2 sons, Naim grew up alongside his brother Jamie, who was his complete opposite. While their parents provided the best possible opportunities for both, Jamie was hardworking and aspired to follow the family tradition by becoming a doctor. Naim, on the other hand, was far more relaxed, self-indulgent, and entitled. Naim impresses with his handsome appearance, modern fashion style, exuding confidence and receiving much love. Many girls at school admired him, and he thrived on the attention. However, in his final years of high school, he began using banned substances and often got into trouble. Thanks to his family's influence, he always avoided serious consequences. Over time, Naim developed a reputation for being arrogant and confrontational. He was a bully, quarrelsome, and prone to violent outbursts. Despite his privileged upbringing, his volatile nature often overshadowed his advantages. In 2018, after graduating from high school, Naeem decided to turn his life around. He left behind his reckless behavior, sought treatment for his substance issues, and later gained acceptance into law school. It was during this new chapter of his life that he met Brenda. He was immediately captivated by her, and she was equally drawn to his confidence and bold demeanor. At the time, Brenda was 23, while Naeem had just turned 19. The age difference did not bother her, and she embraced his attention. When Brenda and Naeem first met, they spent hours talking at a bar. Later that night, they went to an apartment owned by Naeem's parents, to which he had access. That evening marked the beginning of their intimate relationship, and from then on, they began seeing each other frequently. For the first time, Brenda experienced what she believed to be true love and radiated happiness. Her friends and family noticed this transformation, often commenting on how joyful she had become. However, none of them had ever met Naeem, about whom Brenda talked a lot. Although she frequently mentioned Naeem, she only shared his photos from social media with her mother and brothers, casually hinting that he was her future fiancé. Over time, it became obvious that Naeem had no plans to introduce Brenda to his family or friends. Their relationship remained confined to the same apartment, and they never appeared in public together as a couple. Brenda thought it was unusual but convinced herself that Naeem just needed more time. Privately, she also worried that their age difference made him hesitant. The secret meetings lasted for many months, and she still invested a lot of emotions in this relationship. Even when Naeem began to grow distant, she chose to ignore the change in his behavior, clinging to the belief that their connection was still strong. One day, Brenda received a call from an unfamiliar number. The caller identifies himself as Naeem's cousin and gives her a dire warning. He claimed that Naeem had a violent past and that, if not for the protection of his parents, Naeem would have already faced significant legal trouble for his actions. The caller advises her to end the relationship immediately before things get worse. However, she ignores his advice. In mid-February 2019, Brenda found out she was pregnant. The news took her by surprise, but after the initial shock, she felt genuinely happy. She sees this as an opportunity to improve her relationship with Naeem, hoping that this will make him more serious and willing to commit to her. When they met again, Brenda shared the news. At first, Naeem was silent, but his reaction quickly shifted to anger. He stated that he wasn't ready to become a father and insisted that having a child didn't align with his current plans. He urged Brenda to terminate the pregnancy, promising to cover all expenses. Brenda firmly refused, explaining that she had health issues and that being able to conceive was nothing short of a miracle. Their disagreement escalated, and Naeem ended the relationship, saying it was best for them to separate. For a time, they stopped seeing each other but continued exchanging messages on social media. During this period, Brenda confided in a close friend, admitting how much she missed him and expressing hope for reconciliation. She revealed that she had never loved anyone as deeply as she loved Naeem. Towards the end of February, Naeem called Brenda and proposed they meet to have a calm discussion. Brenda was thrilled, convinced that he had reconsidered. She excitedly shared the news with her best friend, who encouraged her and reassured her that everything would work out. They planned to meet on the night of February 28, 2019. That night, she was invited to a classmate's birthday party. After the party, she went to Naeem's apartment and never left again. The following day, Friday, March 1st, Brenda did not attend her university classes, which was highly out of character for her. She had never missed a lecture without a valid reason, and now no one could contact her or determine her whereabouts. Brenda's mother remembered her mentioning the birthday party and saying in advance that she wouldn't be home that night. However, she did not specify whether she would be with friends or her boyfriend. She had planned to go directly to class in the morning, so her mother wasn't initially concerned. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when the university contacted Brenda's family to ask about her absence, that her mother realized something was wrong. Friends and relatives quickly began searching for her. Everyone knew that she wouldn't just vanish without informing someone. At first, there was still hope. Perhaps she was simply spending time with Naeem and had lost track of time. But as relatives began calling around for information, something shocking occurred that changed everything. In that moment, all hope was lost, Brenda was gone forever. At this time, Naeem entered the Catamarca police station, accompanied by his father and 2 attorneys. He stated that he wished to confess to a tragic incident that had occurred the previous night. He was taken to an interrogation room where he calmly recounted his version of the events. Although visibly distressed, he remained composed and spoke confidently. Naeem explained that he had arranged for a female acquaintance, Brenda, to visit his apartment that evening for an intimate encounter. He mentioned that they had met in this way before, without any commitments or expectations. However, that night, an argument broke out between them, leading Naeem to demand that she leave immediately. The apartment consisted of 2 levels connected by a staircase, and Naeem claimed that during the confrontation, Brenda stepped backward, lost her balance, and fell down the stairs. He stated that he tried to catch her but failed. When he reached her, she was unresponsive. He said he attempted to help her, but it was too late. She had sustained a fatal neck injury from the fall. Panicked and fearing he would be blamed, Naeem made a rash decision to dispose of the body. He dragged Brenda to the terrace, where a large outdoor grill was located. Finding lighter fluid in a cabinet, he poured it over her body and lit a match. The fire ignited immediately, but the flames grew uncontrollably high, producing thick smoke. At this point, a neighbor from a nearby apartment noticed the activity and saw someone grilling late at night. When Naeem saw the neighbor, he waved and smiled, appearing calm and friendly. Later, the neighbor testified in court that Naeem's demeanor seemed normal, so he didn't report anything suspicious. Realizing that the grill couldn't be used to completely destroy the remains, Naeem abandoned the idea and brought the body back inside. He then packed the remains into garbage bags, placed them in boxes, and loaded them into his car. Driving aimlessly, he decided to discard the lower half in a random dumpster he passed. For the upper half, he drove out of the city to a shallow ravine near the roadway. He threw the remains into the ditch, covering them with dirt, branches, and trash. As he headed back to his car, a passing patrol unit stopped to check why his car was parked by the roadside. Thinking quickly, Naeem lied, saying that his girlfriend had called him and he had pulled over to talk. The officers believed him and left. Returning to his apartment, Naeem attempted to clean up but found the task overwhelming. In distress, he called his cousin and confessed everything over the phone. Initially, his cousin believed he was hallucinating or under the influence of a banned substance, but the seriousness of the situation soon became clear. The cousin contacted Naeem's father, who, with the help of attorneys, insisted that Naeem turn himself in to the authorities, hoping it would reduce his sentence. During his confession, Naeem disclosed the locations where he had disposed of the remains. Additionally, security camera footage showed him discarding garbage bags into a dumpster, with his car visible in the background. Even if he had tried to deny it, the evidence against him was irrefutable. Investigators quickly found the second box in the ravine, prompting forensic experts to examine the remains. Their analysis revealed a shocking truth that completely contradicted Naeem's account. Although the body had been severely burned, there were no injuries consistent with falling down the stairs, no broken bones, no significant bruising, and, most notably, Brenda's neck was unbroken. Instead, the autopsy revealed a far more sinister cause of death. The cartilage in Brenda's throat had been crushed, not accidentally but by forceful pressure from bare hands. Her official cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled. The horror didn't end there. Forensic experts found fabric fibers inside Brenda's mouth, later determined to be from her own scarf. This indicates that it had been forced into her mouth to silence her before the strangulation. Additionally, fresh scratches on Naeem's hands suggested that Brenda had fought back fiercely. The evidence made one thing clear: this was a calculated and deliberate act of violence, not an accident. When Brenda's family and friends were informed of the tragedy, a new detail emerged: her alleged pregnancy, which Naeem had never mentioned. Under questioning, he admitted that Brenda had been pressuring him for weeks, using the pregnancy to influence him. He explained that their relationship had been entirely physical, not romantic, and that there had been no discussions about a future together or starting a family. He claimed that when Brenda revealed she was pregnant, he immediately offered to pay for an abortion, but she refused. This disagreement had sparked several heated arguments. On the night of the incident, Brenda allegedly not only insisted on keeping the baby but also demanded that Naeem marry her. According to Naeem, Her demands infuriated him, and, in a fit of rage, he ended her life. However, there was a major flaw in Naeem's story. An autopsy revealed that Brenda was not pregnant. If she had used the pregnancy as leverage, it was an empty claim. Investigators uncovered an even more shocking truth. Brenda had a medical condition that made pregnancy impossible, a fact she had known since her teenage years. So why had she told Naeem she was pregnant? One of Brenda's closest friends explained during questioning that Brenda genuinely believed she was pregnant. She had missed her period, experienced symptoms, and was overjoyed, thinking doctors had been wrong about her condition. When she shared the news with Naeem, he dismissed her claim and cut ties with her. Brenda confided in only 2 close friends about the pregnancy, never saw a doctor to confirm it, and didn't tell her mother. According to her closest friend, she had no intention of manipulating Naeem. She truly believed she was going to be a mother and had started imagining a future with him. Naeem was arrested the same day he turned himself in and shared his version of events. He claimed what happened was an accident. According to him, he panicked and, in his shock, made the horrific decision to dispose of Brenda's body in a brutal way. He also insisted that their connection was purely casual, with no emotional commitment or real relationship. In Argentina, crimes within romantic or domestic relationships are classified as aggravated offenses due to the victim's vulnerable position. Victims typically trust their partner, do not perceive them as a threat, and may have a diminished sense of self-preservation. If the court ruled that Brenda and Naeem had a real relationship, he could face life in prison. However, if he convinced the court it was merely a casual arrangement with no emotional ties, his sentence might be reduced to a maximum of 15 years. Naeem and his legal team, hired by his father, focused on proving this. Naeem's lawyers argued that he and Brenda were never seen together in public, had no shared photos, and had not introduced each other to their families or friends. However, Brenda's family and friends described a different reality. They insisted that Brenda was deeply in love with Naeem and believed he felt the same. She avoided pressuring him or pushing for formal introductions to his family, assuming he simply needed time. One of Naeem's classmates later disclosed that Naeem had never taken Brenda seriously. He enjoyed spending time with her but had been leading her on, giving her false hope. When Brenda told him she was pregnant, he reportedly panicked and became desperate to find a way out. The classmate claimed Naeem had said the baby would never be born or he would end his life. At the time, nobody thought much of his words. However, about a week before the crime, Naeem allegedly approached his cousin, asking if he knew someone who could solve a problem in exchange for money. His cousin dismissed it as a joke and didn't take it seriously. It wasn't until the night of the crime, when Naeem called asking for help to cover up what he had done, that his cousin realized the gravity of the situation. After the tragedy, Naeem's family publicly expressed their condolences to Brenda's loved ones, stating that her loss had devastated their own lives as well. Despite this, his legal team worked to minimize his responsibility, alleging that Brenda had been manipulating and pressuring him. They even accused her of faking the pregnancy to trap him into marriage, claiming she had ulterior motives and saw Naeem as a wealthy and promising husband. Naeem also tried to argue that he acted in a moment of extreme distress, but his defense quickly crumbled. During his first interrogation, he provided detailed descriptions of how he disposed of Brenda's remains, details that were inconsistent with someone allegedly in shock. Additionally, a neighbor's testimony proved damning. The neighbor recounted seeing Naeem grilling on the terrace that night and noted that he appeared calm and composed. The neighbor even remembered Naeem waving hello in a friendly manner, as if everything were normal. The psychiatric evaluation concluded that Naeem was fully aware of his actions at the time of the crime and could be held legally responsible. However, specialists diagnosed him with psychopathic traits, borderline personality disorder, and bipolar affective disorder. Despite these diagnoses, none diminished his legal accountability. Naeem's family was wealthy and well-connected, which could have enabled him to avoid full responsibility. His legal team deliberately delayed the trial, hoping public interest would eventually wane. Brenda's family feared that Naeem might receive a light sentence or even evade justice entirely. Determined to prevent this, Brenda's mother took action. She organized numerous protests and marches, demanding justice for her daughter. Feminist activists also joined the effort, ensuring the case remained in the public spotlight. The trial began in May 2021 and attracted widespread media attention. A key focus of the proceedings was defining the relationship between Naeem and Brenda. His defense attorneys argued that, given his young age, he was not ready for a serious commitment and that his relationship with Brenda was nothing more than a casual fling. If the defense managed to convince the court, Naeem could have received a lighter sentence. Additionally, they sought to prove that the crime was not premeditated, which could have made him eligible for parole within 5 to 7 years. During the trial, Naeem remained cold and detached, showing no remorse for his actions. Following his attorney's advice, he apologized formally to Brenda's family, but his apology came across as insincere and even mocking. On May 14, 2021, Naeem was convicted of aggravated homicide and attempting to conceal the crime. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and was also ordered to pay Brenda's family 3 million pesos in moral damages. Naeem refused to make a final statement and listened to the verdict with an indifferent expression, as if it did not affect him. Immediately after the sentencing, his attorneys announced their intention to file an appeal. As the legal team prepared for the appeal, looking for new witnesses and evidence to support Naeem's innocence, the media uncovered incidents from his past that his parents had previously concealed. 2 former classmates accused Naeem of harassment and aggressive behavior. Both women agreed to testify, describing him as a dangerous individual who could not handle rejection. While he was often pursued by girls, on the occasions when someone rejected his advances, he responded by stalking, threatening, and trying to humiliate them. One classmate described how she had to transfer schools after Naeem tried to force himself on her. When she resisted, he retaliated by spreading malicious rumors and leaking private photos of her online. At the time, his father's legal team had managed to suppress these incidents. In March 2022, a retrial was held for Brenda's case. With the new testimonies considered, the court upheld its original ruling. Naeem Vera was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 51 years. Megan Varriquez grew up in Pittsburgh, in a supportive and loving family. Her parents had lived happily together for over 30 years, and she had always hoped that one day she could find a love like theirs. In her 20s, she got married, but sadly, the relationship ended in divorce as she and her husband grew apart. This thing made her lose faith in love and caused her to be reluctant to start a new relationship. However, life had other plans for her. In the winter of 2014, a man named Leon Jacob checked into the downtown Pittsburgh hotel where Megan worked as a manager. Initially, she was put off by Leon's arrogance and lack of consideration for others. But over time, his charm and persistence wore down her reservations. Against her instincts, she decided to give him a chance. Leon showered her with affection and attention, and soon, she found herself falling for him. Coming from a wealthy family, Leon had attended an elite boarding school and later built a successful career as a transplant surgeon. Like Megan, he had also faced challenges in his love life, as he was going through a divorce when they met. As their relationship grew, he convinced her that she deserved a wonderful life. Eventually, Leon decided to move back to Houston, his hometown, and invited Megan to join him. Although Megan loved her life in Pittsburgh, she was excited for a fresh start and eager to take their relationship to the next level. Upon arriving in Houston, she began looking for work and found a job as a sales clerk at a hotel in the area. This allowed her to explore a new city while building her independence. She rented an apartment, where Leon later moved in with her. They also opened a joint bank account, which felt like a significant step for Megan. She initially struggled with sharing finances, but she also saw it as a sign of Leon's commitment and their promising future. When Megan met Leon's family, they bonded quickly, and she began picturing Leon as her future husband. Despite being far from her loved ones in Pittsburgh, she adjusted well to life in Houston. She created a new social circle and adopted a dog, which brought her joy. Online, Megan and Leon appeared to have the perfect relationship, sharing photos of their adventures, romantic gestures, and happy moments. But behind that facade, cracks in their relationship begin to show. Leon was unable to practice medicine in Texas because he lacked the required license. This obstacle derailed his career ambitions as a transplant surgeon. Feeling undervalued, He refused to accept a job as a surgeon's assistant, which he viewed as beneath his qualifications. Over time, this career setback placed significant strain on their relationship. Megan, who had sacrificed much of her independence to support him, began to feel unappreciated and frustrated. As tensions mount, they realize that their dreams for the future are increasingly different. While Megan wanted to believe in a shared future, Leon's frustration and dissatisfaction with his circumstances made it difficult to align their goals. Instead of seeking employment in his field, Leon relied heavily on Megan's income to support their household. This financial dependence placed an overwhelming burden on her. She began experiencing frustration and resentment as the weight of her responsibilities took a toll on her emotional and mental well-being. In a heated moment, Megan expressed her frustrations with Leon in front of his family, further straining their relationship. When they returned to their apartment, the situation escalated. Angered, Leon lashed out violently, tearing through Megan's closet and throwing all her clothes off the balcony. This act of violence left Megan feeling hurt, helpless, and having difficulty accepting the seriousness of what had just happened. Over time, Leon's anger toward Megan worsened, escalating from verbal insults to physical violence. He frequently exhibited abusive behavior, such as throwing a glass bottle he used for spitting tobacco at her, humiliating her, and calling her degrading names. The abuse grew increasingly frequent, leaving Megan in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Despite his actions, Leon often expressed regret, claiming he loved her and that she was his source of happiness. However, his apologies were short-lived, and the cycle of abuse continued, leaving Megan feeling helpless and isolated. On January 12, 2017, after a long day of work at the hotel, Megan returned home to find Leon in a foul mood. Without explanation, he threw a glass of wine at her. After years of enduring abuse, she had reached her breaking point. Determined to break free from the toxic relationship, she confronted Leon and told him she was leaving him. Resolute, she packed her belongings and prepared to leave. However, he did not accept that and decided to confront her. As Megan attempted to leave with her suitcase, Leon stormed into the bedroom and tried to stop her. He covered her face with his hands, physically restraining her in a threatening manner. Terrified, Megan realized the danger of the situation and acted quickly. She grabbed her dog and ran out of the bedroom, desperate to escape. Leon chased after her as she fled down the driveway, even tugging at the car door to prevent her from leaving. Megan, determined to get away, managed to close the car door and drive off. While she was trying to escape, Leon continued to chase her, threatening to break the car window if she didn't stop. Afraid for her safety, she ignored his threats and kept driving, putting as much distance as she could between herself and him. The next day, when Megan arrived at work at the hotel, it was clear she had been crying. Friends and colleagues approached her to ask questions because they saw her suffering. Unable to hold back any longer, Megan broke down and revealed the abuse she had been enduring at Leon's hands. Her friends and coworkers were shocked to learn the truth about what she had been going through. Throughout the day, Leon repeatedly contacted Megan through various methods, sending her erratic messages. Some messages were filled with declarations of love and apologies, along with his intentions to propose, while others abruptly stated that he was done with her. As the day went on, Megan became increasingly frustrated with Leon's constant harassment and asked him to stop contacting her. To her shock, she later discovered that he had emptied their bank account. When she returned home, she found their apartment in disarray, with all the furniture gone. Luckily, she arrived before Leon could dispose of her clothes and personal belongings. She promptly went to the police station to report Leon for assault and also sought a protective order, though the process was slow. A few days later, as Megan was leaving her apartment for work, she noticed Leon in her rearview mirror following her. Panicked, she sped through the city in an attempt to lose him, but he persistently pursued her. He eventually cut her off, forcing her to stop. He approached her car and insisted that leaving him was a mistake. She managed to swerve her car and escape. Leon's behavior caused so much trouble that the hotel where Megan worked eventually banned him from the premises. Undeterred, he began lurking outside the building, making Megan's coworkers and friends uncomfortable. Finally, one of Megan's friends confronted Leon, chasing him across the street and yelling at him to stop harassing her. Despite this confrontation, the harassment persisted, ultimately culminating in Leon's arrest for assault. However, he was released from jail the very next day. Even the prospect of legal consequences did not deter him. 2 weeks after his arrest, Megan had to appear in court alongside Leon. During the proceedings, the judge issued a protective order for Megan against Leon. Sitting in the courtroom that day was Valerie McDaniel, a successful veterinarian from Houston. Valerie had recently endured a difficult divorce from her husband, Mac, after 19 years of marriage. Megan and Valerie were previously just close friends, but their relationship became closer as Valerie faced difficulties during her divorce. Megan was shocked to discover that Valerie had supported Leon in court. What surprised her even more was learning that Valerie had helped post Leon's bail. According to a sponsor, Leon not only applied for bail but also contacted a man named Zach. He gave Zach a large sum of money to resolve an issue. He emphasized that she needed to disappear and that he couldn't let her testify against him in court. Troubled by Leon's alarming words, which implied he might have hired Zach to harm a witness, the bail bondsman raised the alarm, contacting his connections, including a city council member and the Houston police chief, to share his concerns. In late February 2017, Megan finally felt relieved to be free from Leon's control and received a protective order. However, her peace was soon shattered when she was contacted by a detective who warned her about a threat to her life. Feeling fearful and uncertain, she met the detectives the next day, disguised in a wig, hat, and sunglasses. The detectives explained that they had received information about the threat and needed to ensure her safety. For her protection, they surrounded her with police officers and advised her to leave Texas and relocate to Pittsburgh. She quickly packed her belongings and left. The investigation into Leon and the alleged murder-for-hire plot was turned over to the Harris County District Attorney's Special Crimes Bureau. As detectives delved deeper into the case, they were surprised to learn that Leon was a doctor, a profession rarely associated with individuals involved in such serious crimes. During their investigation, they identified his associate, Zach, who was revealed to be a man named Motaz Azza. When Motaz was interviewed, he admitted to knowing Leon but denied being a hitman. He disclosed that Leon had approached him with a request to kill his ex-girlfriend, Megan. However, Motaz claimed he had no intention of harming her and was only motivated by the promise of financial compensation. He also revealed that Leon frequently contacted him, pressuring him to go through with the plan. Detectives offered Motaz a chance to cooperate with them in order to catch Leon in the act, and he agreed to help. With Motaz's cooperation, the detectives moved closer to arresting Leon while ensuring Megan's safety. Their plan focused on protecting Megan and apprehending Leon without endangering any of the parties involved. A few days later, Leon and his girlfriend Valerie met with Motaz and another man named Javier at a local Olive Garden. Javier, introduced as a potential hitman, was in fact an undercover police officer. During the conversation, Leon shared detailed ideas about how to kill Megan, including using a lethal injection of potassium chloride to stop her heart. He believed this method would leave no trace and arouse no suspicion. Leon further explained that Valerie, as a veterinarian, had access to potassium chloride through her clinic. He suggested that Valerie could supply the drug to facilitate the plan. Leon also disclosed that Megan was not the only person he wanted killed. He expressed his desire to eliminate additional targets, including Valerie's ex-husband, Mac, whom he described as the worst person he had ever met. Leon's enthusiasm for involving Motaz and Javier in his schemes grew as the conversation continued. Later, Valerie confided in Javier, unaware that he was an undercover officer. She shared her concerns about Mac, revealing that he was planning to fight for custody of her daughter. Detectives involved in the case approached Megan and Mac, asking for their assistance in a fake abduction and murder plan. The idea was to create a staged crime scene and take photos as evidence for an undercover officer to present to Leon and Valerie. Although initially hesitant, Megan and Mac agreed to collaborate. To stage Mac's supposed execution inside his car, detectives used pig's blood to make it appear as though he had been shot in the head. Knowing Leon was a doctor, they took extra precautions to ensure the scene looked realistic. For Megan, the detectives staged a kidnapping scenario. They bound her hands and feet with zip ties and covered her mouth with duct tape. Realizing that Leon had hired someone to kill her, she became increasingly distressed and cried throughout the process. She felt trapped, caught in the detectives' plan to lure Leon into incriminating himself. After taking photos of the staged crime scene, Javier, the undercover cop, contacts Leon, informing him that he dealt with Mac and shows Leon the photos. Javier also claimed that Megan had been kidnapped but said she was unwilling to flee the state or drop any charges against Leon. He then suggested that killing her was the only viable solution. A few hours later, police arrived at Valerie's apartment, where both she and Leon were present. They recorded the encounter using body cameras as they informed Valerie that Mac had been killed. In reality, Mac was completely safe. Upon receiving the news, Leon and Valerie pretended to be shocked. Without being asked, Leon claimed that he and Valerie had been home all day with her daughter, offering an alibi that appeared rehearsed and suspicious. Leon and Valerie were arrested for soliciting capital murder. After their arrest, the officers revealed that neither Mac nor Megan had been harmed, they were both alive and safe. Leon pleaded not guilty to the charges. Valerie was released on a $50,000 bond 3 days after her arrest. Valerie's friends believed she never would have been involved in the plot if not for Leon's influence. According to them, Valerie craved love and attention, which Leon exploited through manipulation and his controlling behavior. They believed that Leon's emotional and psychological grip on Valerie pushed her to commit the crime. Valerie's loved ones described her as a caring and compassionate person who was always ready to help others. They were shocked at the thought of her involvement in any harmful actions against Mac or his loved ones. They believed Valerie's desire for affection blinded her to the consequences of her choices. Her friends portrayed Leon as a manipulative and controlling man who used his charm to influence others, including Valerie. They felt his control over her emotions and decisions ultimately drove her actions. 2 weeks after being released on bail, Valerie ended her life. She was scheduled to appear in court the next day. Before her death, Valerie recorded a video on her iPad explaining her perspective on the murder-for-hire scheme that had led to her arrest. In the video, she claimed that the police had entrapped her and insisted she never intended to harm her ex-husband Mac, who was also the father of her daughter. Valerie's death shocked her loved ones. He was reportedly devastated by the news, according to Leon's attorney. Leon, who considered Valerie his wife, requested permission from the judge to attend her funeral, but his request was denied. In 2018, Leon stood trial for attempting to solicit capital murder. His defense argued that he had not hired a hitman with the intention of killing his ex-girlfriend Megan. Instead, they claimed he had hired a private investigator to help reunite with her and had no plan to harm her. However, prosecutors rejected this argument and presented evidence, including recordings in which Leon discussed killing Megan using a potassium chloride injection. The jury was also shown staged crime scene photos of Megan and Mac, depicting them as murder victims. Finally, Leon Jacob was convicted on 2 charges of soliciting capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison and fined $10,000.
On December 5, 1975, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a married couple was on their way home from a school basketball game. At around 8:30 p.m., the wife decided to visit her niece, Lindy, who lived nearby. They parked their car near the apartment complex, and she got out to quickly check on her niece, leaving her husband in the car. However, when she reached the apartment, she discovered that the front door was unlocked. Cautiously peering inside, she saw a knocked-over floor lamp and other items scattered around. The disarray of the apartment indicated that a fight had occurred. When she noticed strange stains on the floor resembling blood, she stepped into the living room. What she discovered would haunt her forever. In the center of the room lay Lindy, with a knife stabbed into her throat. Overwhelmed with panic, she ran out of the house and hurried to her car to call the police. The police arrived at the scene and were baffled about who could have had a conflict with the young 19-year-old girl who had recently gotten married. They wondered what could have led to her brutal murder. Lindy Sue Beekler was born on January 31, 1956. Her parents divorced when she was very young. She was raised by her mother. Her father moved to the suburbs, remarried, and had a son with his new wife, making him Lindy's half-brother. From a young age, Lindy was curious and cheerful. She loved exploring new activities. Lindy participated in the Girl Scouts, went hiking, enjoyed boating, and joined different clubs. Lindy was a positive person who made everyone feel good. Her bright smile encouraged others to smile too. Above all, she treasured her family. One of her favorite things to do was curl up on the couch with her mother. In those moments, she felt like the happiest person alive because her mother was not only a caring parent, but also her best friend. Recently, Lindy had been employed at a flower shop, where her boss and co-workers described her as very hardworking, humble, and somewhat shy. However, once they got to know her better, Lindy revealed her fun side. She had a great sense of humor. Despite this, she preferred not to be the center of attention. Lindy married at a young age despite her insecurities. Her husband, Philip Beekler, was 5 years older than her. They first met when Lindy was visiting her sister. They were instantly attracted to each other. On October 19th, the year before the attack, Lindy and Philip tied the knot. The ceremony was officiated by Philip's grandfather, who blessed their union, saying they were perfect for one another. Philip worked part-time as an agent at a car rental company while studying art at Millersville State College. It appeared he was inspired by his parents. His mother owned an art gallery and was deeply passionate about art. Lindy is just 2 months away from turning 20 and has recently begun to embrace adult life as a married woman. Philip and Lindy were happily living together in their small one-bedroom apartment. However, Lindy felt uneasy being home alone. She never felt safe since they moved in. She constantly sensed that someone was watching her through the sliding glass door. Though she couldn't pinpoint anyone specific, overall, she was simply afraid to be alone in the apartment. In January, they planned to move to a new place in Manor Township. In the evenings, Lindy got home from work a couple of hours before her husband. She would lock the doors and turn on all the lights, carefully listening to every noise. During the investigation of the crime scene, the police found that Lindy had been stabbed 19 times. The attack involved 2 different knives. One knife, which the attacker had brought, was never found, while the other knife came from Lindy's kitchen. This kitchen knife was still in her neck when her aunt discovered her. Lindy's body showed 11 stab wounds to her chest and upper abdomen, 5 to her back, and 3 to her neck. One of the stabs had pierced the carotid artery, causing her to bleed to death. Experts noted that Lindy had defensive wounds on her hands, suggesting she fought fiercely for her life until the very end. The apartment was in chaos, with blood everywhere. It appeared that, after finishing her shift at the flower shop, Lindy had stopped to buy groceries, as bags of food were left on the kitchen table, still unpacked. This indicates that the attack occurred right after she returned home. Several pieces of evidence were collected at the crime scene. A shoe print, likely size 10 or 11, was discovered on the kitchen floor. This print suggested that the attacker was likely a large, strong man. Another piece of evidence hinted at a possible motive, although Lindy was fully clothed when found. Detectives suspected she had been abused. Male fluid was discovered on her underwear, which could provide the perpetrator's DNA. However, in 1975, forensic capabilities were limited. Experts could only identify the attacker's blood type and compare it with that of a suspect, but they needed to identify a suspect first. Unfortunately, that was where the evidence trail ended. The police also lacked the perpetrator's fingerprints, as the knife handle found in Lindy's throat was wrapped in a kitchen towel. The news of Lindy's tragic death devastated her family. Relatives called Philip at work, telling him he needed to come home immediately because something had happened to Lindy. As he rushed to their apartment, he feared the worst, but he could never have imagined that his beloved wife had been brutally killed. The police did not allow Philip inside the apartment, leaving him confused about what had happened. They kept him in the hallway until he found out the heartbreaking news that Lindy was dead. Seeing how pale he became, medics gave him a sedative, and the police took him to his mother's house. For about 4 days, Philip felt lost. He couldn't tell whether it was day or night or how much time had passed since the tragedy. He had to sit and wait for answers while the police continued their investigation. Detectives interviewed her co-workers and employer, and none of them noticed anything unusual about her behavior. Lindy went to work at the flower shop in a good mood. That day, she did not appear anxious or scared. There were no dissatisfied customers. Everything was completely normal. Lindy excitedly shared with her colleagues about the Christmas gift she had prepared for her husband. That evening, she calmly got into her car, waved goodbye to her colleagues, and drove home. Unbeknownst to anyone, it would be her last evening alive. Around 5:30 p.m. After work, Lindy went to the car dealership where her husband, Philip, worked to pick up his paycheck. She cashed the check at the bank and then went to a nearby grocery store to buy groceries, filling 4 bags. Afterward, she headed home, parked her car, and began unloading the bags. It seemed likely she would need to make 2 trips. At that moment, someone likely entered her apartment and attacked her. Detectives speculated on this since there were no signs of forced entry, and Lindy was not the kind of person to let a stranger into her home. This led the police to believe that Lindy knew her attacker, felt safe being alone with them. The first person the detectives looked at as a suspect was the victim's husband, Philip. However, the family and friends insisting that Philip and Lindy were a happy couple. Philip deeply loved Lindy and felt incredibly lucky to be dating her. Amazed that someone so beautiful would be interested in him, he said she changed his life for the better by inspiring him to enroll in college and pursue painting. In return, he supported her dream of opening a flower shop. When Lindy was killed, it devastated Philip. He couldn't bear to stay in their apartment, where every corner reminded him of her, so he moved out. Although he had a strong alibi, investigators were slow to clear him as a suspect. Following Lindy's death, Philip felt lost. He wandered the streets for hours, dropped out of college. They had dreamt of finishing their studies, starting a family, and planning their future together. Now, in an instant, all their dreams collapsed, like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. Philip had to completely rebuild his life in light of this tragic reality. The second suspect in the investigation was Bob, Lindy's direct supervisor. His favorable comments and positive evaluations of Lindy took an unexpected turn. The day before her tragic death, Lindy baked him blueberry muffins for his birthday. Bob spoke so highly of her that police began to question whether he had developed an inappropriate attachment. At 35 years old, single, and without an alibi, Bob caught the attention of the authorities, prompting them to scrutinize him more closely. The pressure became overwhelming, leading him to hire a lawyer to safeguard his privacy. Bob passed a lie detector test and fully cooperated with the police. After clearing both Lindy's husband and Bob as suspects, the police interviewed hundreds of people, including friends, family, and acquaintances. Yet they found no one who might have wanted to harm her. Neighbors were also questioned, but no one reported seeing anything unusual that day. The atmosphere in the apartment complex grew tense as residents began purchasing weapons for protection. While violence in other neighborhoods was concerning, the murder of a young woman next door felt particularly alarming. A note from the police was taped to the Beeklers' front door, indicating that it was a crime scene and restricting access for local residents. This served as a constant reminder of the tragedy and the unsettling reality that the killer might still be nearby. The investigation hit a dead end. The only clue from neighbors was a report of an unfamiliar dark-colored car parked outside Lindy's house at the time of her death, with its headlights on. Even if the driver was not involved in the crime, they could have been a witness. However, locating the car proved to be impossible. Neighbors' descriptions varied widely, and no one could recall the license plate number. Meanwhile, the police station was overwhelmed with calls. Although some leads seemed promising, none led to concrete answers, forcing investigators to develop their own theories. One theory suggested that Lindy was being stalked by someone who observed her and her husband's routines, waiting for the right moment to attack. It's possible the intruder entered the apartment while Lindy was unloading groceries, or that it was a burglar who planned to steal valuables, but panicked and assaulted her with a knife when she unexpectedly returned. However, the burglary theory was weak because Lindy's purse, containing her jewelry, was still in the apartment. Additionally, the nature of the abuse assault did not align with typical burglar behavior. The police eventually identified an 18-year-old suspect, who was arrested. He was known for committing terrible acts. He had already attacked 4 women, binding them with their own clothing and stabbing them with a screwdriver. In one instance, when a victim attempted to flee, he chased her in his car and tried to run her over. The location and timing of his crimes made the police suspect his involvement in Lindy's attack. However, investigations revealed he was not connected to that incident, as he was at work that day, supported by multiple colleagues. In December 1976, Lindy's family visited her grave to pay their respects. What they found left them in shock. Someone had vandalized the grave. The headstone was covered in knife marks. Pieces of it were scattered nearby, and the rest was splattered with red spray paint. The police took this incident seriously, as they believed the vandal might have also been involved in Lindy's death. The use of a knife suggested the vandal was aware of how Lindy had died, and notably, only her grave had been targeted in the entire cemetery. Since the family had kept the burial location private, it indicated that the vandal had intentionally sought it out, possibly by following family members. Unfortunately, the detectives were unable to identify the culprit. An entire year went by without any answers, leaving Lindy's family in a state of confusion and distress about what happened to her. In the following years, detectives looked into many people who were connected to Lindy's life. They examined her mother's boyfriend, looked into frequent customers of the flower shop, and even explored possible connections to serial killers active in Pennsylvania at that time. In their search for answers, they even consulted psychics. Despite these efforts, the case of Lindy Beekler's death remained unsolved. 25 years after Lindy's tragic death, the lead detective retired, leaving the Lindy case as one of the oldest unsolved cases in Lancaster County. In 2006, the investigation into Lindy's death was transferred to a special group in Pennsylvania that focused on old unsolved cases, utilizing new techniques and perspectives. However, they too were unable to make any progress. Decades after his wife's death, Philip Beekler discovered the DNA analysis techniques used to convict the perpetrator. He believed these methods could also be applied to his wife Lindy's case. In 2019, police applied these techniques to analyze DNA from the crime scene and created a composite sketch of a potential suspect based on the DNA. A computer program produced 2 portraits. One depicted how the suspect likely appeared at the time of Lindy's attack, and the other showed what the suspect might look like at age 65. While the portraits weren't exact representations, they revealed important details about the suspect, including fair skin, brown eyes, dark hair, and possible distinctive features. Despite this progress, locating the suspect was still difficult. The DNA sample was analyzed by C.C. Moore, a well-known American genetic genealogist. She discovered that the DNA found on the victim's underwear in 1975 was connected to a small town in Italy. Moore invested a lot of time identifying individuals with Italian ancestry who were living in Lancaster County at the time of Lindy's murder. She traced the migration patterns from this small Italian town to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. After ruling out over 2,000 individuals with similar genetic profiles, she was able to use public records to narrow it down to one suspect. This led her to identify the likely killer, a man named David Sinopoli. Investigators checked the name against existing databases, but found no records. This man had never been noticed by the police before, and his name was not on any suspect lists. However, while reviewing the case files, detectives learned that David lived in the same apartment complex as the Beeklers. To establish his connection to Lindy's death, they needed to obtain David's DNA. On February 11, 2022, David was at Philadelphia International Airport waiting for his flight. To pass the time, he bought coffee, not realizing that police were observing him from afar. After David finished his coffee, he threw the empty cup into a trash bin. An officer then discreetly collected the discarded cup and placed it in a plastic bag for further examination. The cup was sent to a lab for DNA analysis. which revealed a match between the DNA on the cup and the seminal fluid found on Lindy Beekler's underwear, confirming that David Sinopoli had been at the crime scene. Additionally, 2 drops of blood found on her stockings matched his DNA, providing further evidence. Initially, investigators thought the significant amount of blood at the crime scene belonged to the victim. However, they also considered the possibility that the perpetrator had injured himself and left behind traces of his blood. On July 17, 2022, around 7 a.m., police arrived at David's home, a few miles from the site where Lindy was murdered years earlier. He did not resist arrest, but his wife, who had been married to him for 36 years, was completely shocked. They had 3 children and 9 grandchildren, all of whom were unaware that they had been living with a criminal and murderer. Following the tragic murder of 19-year-old Lindy, David had lived quietly for nearly 47 years, never revealing his past and believing he would escape punishment. After David was arrested, Lindy's family had a reason to celebrate. Unfortunately, many family members never got to see justice served. Lindy's father died in 2000, and her mother followed in 2007. Her husband, Philip, was still alive and had remarried around 1990. Even though he hadn't initially planned to, he wanted to honor Lindy's hopes for him by finishing college, attending graduate school, and becoming an artist, which he accomplished. Eventually, he was able to let go of the tragedy and move forward with his life. The day after David's arrest, the police held a press conference announcing that they considered the case of Lindy Beekler's murder closed. Friends and family of David struggled to believe he was involved, thinking there must have been a misunderstanding. However, it's painful to acknowledge that this man evaded consequences for his actions for nearly 50 years, living as if nothing had happened after taking a young woman's future. Years went by, but the police never forgot about the case and continuously worked to solve it. Eventually, justice was served. David Sinopoli was taken into custody without the option for bail. Initially, he strongly denied any connection to Beekler's death, but as the trial date approached, he changed his mind and agreed to a plea deal. On October 19, 2023, 48 years after the crime, David Sinopoli pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, aggravated assault, and burglary. He received a prison sentence of 25 to 50 years. The judge mentioned that considering the defendant's age, this effectively amounted to a life sentence. David never explained why he killed Lindy by brutally stabbing her 19 times and violating her body to fulfill his selfish desires. Lindy and David were neighbors in the same apartment complex, but there is no evidence that they ever interacted prior to the crime. This leaves the true motives behind his actions a mystery, even to the police. It's possible that David was strongly attracted to her and eventually succumbed to his hidden urges. His primal instincts took over, which is why he is now in prison.